Welcome back, Seekers! In our journey to complete watching the Freak Show series all the way up until episode number 8, we now move on to episode 2 and 3 for this video. Now, of course, you may be asking, well, why not make a video for each episode? And the answer is quite simple. First and foremost, episode 2 is what I would probably consider to be probably the least important in terms of most of the episodes that we encounter in the series, which makes sense as each episode goes by, the characterizations that we are presented with in the series grow as well. However, in this episode, as you recall, not really much happens besides the typical foundation of truth that occurs here, which is that Rev is homesick, at least through, of course, Mark's perspective. A lot of what Rev does in this entire episode is primarily just the aspect of taking control of his own actions, which makes sense, as we said in the first episode. A bit of what he essentially does in this entire circumstance is quite literally take control of his situation by using his amulet, right, his pendant/amulet, to essentially continuously bring back these dead students in order to really encounter some level of solution to his problem, right? Which is what we said before, right? A big part of Rev's character is that he does not really give up easily, because he's always about functioning in terms of what his own entire solutions really present himself with, right? And so we have Raven, of course, in this entire situation. I mentioned before that a big part of his entire character, especially in this episode, and mentioning Raven towards the beginning of the pilot last episode, I said how a big part of Rev's character is that he does not practically reveal his internal feelings, right? He keeps them covered up. You can call it stubbornness. You can call it a level of defensiveness for being in a situation where everything around him is a foreign entity. But one of the big parts about his entire character is that he does not allow himself to take a moment of vulnerability, right? Due to the fact that, again, you encounter people like Viviana in the world where they will try to box you up, right? They will try to control your agency, control where you are, what you can do, right? And Rev is not about that, right? Rev is about escaping his current circumstance. So what about this episode? Well, in this episode, as you all know, Rev continuously brings back these dead students from the grave, where they died. A lot of students had died before, which was mentioned, of course, by Viviana, that one would rather die than one would sooner die than escape Cade Academy, which we see in this episode is actually true. But one of the big characterizations in this episode is, of course, Raven and Rev. Mark is the one who precisely makes this entire comparison along a lot of moments where he compares Rev to, or I'd say less compares, but he definitely, believes that Rev is homesick a lot of the time, right? So that's something we mentioned beforehand here as well, is that when it comes into Rev, his independence trumps any aspect of being assisted by other people. However, he does believe in the fairness of beneficial aspects. He questions his own identity constantly, but he's not without his own kind of reasoning here as well, right? So what about Raven? Well, when it comes into Raven here, Raven is someone who, of course, we were introduced to in the first episode, right? Raven is someone who is, of course, really reckless, right? He always gets herself killed, and has to be brought back by, of course, the Vedets. And a big part about that is that she creates a sense of divergence from predetermined action. That's right, we're making a psychological analysis on a dead cat. But a big part of Raven's entire situation is that, she is presented as this humorous, attempt to show that, she's consistently dying, has to be brought back to life. Which, again, really similar to Rev, wouldn't you say? Right? A big part of Raven's character, if it is to always be brought back to life, it essentially goes against Rev's whole thing, which is essentially that, he doesn't care about his existence at all, right? And that part is similar in terms of the attributes that are shared between Raven and him at the same time. Be that as it is, though, you have all these different moments where Mark is trying to tell Rev that, like, oh, you have to care for Raven, right? She is like, and not even that you have to, right? He genuinely believes that Rev cares for Raven, right? Because it reminds him of home, right? It reminds him of a situation that allows him to, reconnect back to that, right? Like, oh, you brought back Raven because you miss her, right? Which, again, that goes back into what we're going to see in episode 3 toward the end with the Venets returning from the pilot, right? Just to talk to Viviana convincing them that Rev is doing just fine, right? But again, like, it's all about this entire situation of a connection between life and death, right? But if Raven is reckless and she diverges from predetermined actions, so whenever, like, Rev tells her to do something, she will take a long time to do that, or even not do it at all, right? Which, typical behavior for a cat in general. But again, it creates this entire scenario where, like, the differences and the similarities between them are incredibly telling, right? It's not without their own entire flaws as well, because Raven is not Rev and Rev is not Raven, essentially to a T. But there is this entire connection between the two that you really can't ignore either, right? It is this entire persona that is given for them as well, right? But Raven is also, what's the word for it? I'm trying to think of the word. She is essentially, I guess for now we'll say apathetic, right? But I think she's apathetic towards the assistance provided by others. Oh, and in case you're seeing Wendy here on the screen and wondering why I'm not really talking about that, Wendy in this episode just kind of does, the typical bully thing, which is that she'll take the amulet and then, of course, revives the students that Mark is trying to, or Rev is trying to kill once again, right? There's not really that much towards that. We also see here that Rev is a lot more confrontational and a lot, and to a certain degree, because when he gets, of course, burned in the stove later on by Wendy in order to kill both himself and Sebastian for the time being, he's more like, he's pretty much able to be calm in that situation because he knows that he'll just come back anyway, right? But with Wendy here, it's just all about the aspect of being an annoyance for the sake of being an annoyance, right? Again, it's not necessarily something that is what we would call completely irrational. But again, like, her entire thing is about, like, insinuating that, like, oh yeah, I'm going to make your life harder for you because I'm going to do this thing that's essentially annoying, right? But it's not like, oh, I'm going to kill you like she said last time, even though she does end up doing that, right? But that's not her main task. Her main task is just to prove as much of an annoyance as possible, right? But again, it's all about this entire, scenario there. And you have this moment here where when Mark essentially asks, like, oh, should we get Professor Lovecraft to help fix this entire mess? Rev, of course, immediately shuts it down. Now, of course, quite generally, as he says here, right, it's like if he finds out his entire, amulet is going to be confiscated, right, he's not going to have it anymore, right? Again, Rev holds a connection to what he considers to be his own sense of control, which here would be his amulet, right? His amulet is a part of what he has in terms of showcasing his own strength and magic, which, as we saw in the pilot, was a big part of his egotistical nature, is that he is so prideful of what he's capable of doing, right, that without his amulet, without this entire anchor of magic that he has towards him as well, he won't even have a chance to do that. Now, however, we are going to see that that is going to be a bit different on episode 5 during the haunted school episode, which, primarily you can just call it the Bella Dawn episode, let's be honest, but it's entirely all about a sense of control towards the situation. But during that episode, again, he's a lot less panicky when it comes into casting that spell. Now, of course, he has Belladonna with him in that episode, but again, whenever he loses a sense of control, he becomes a lot more, let's say, reckless, right? Again, he's running to the playground. He's going to tell, God damn, I forgot his name. Wolf Boy here. He's going to tell Wolf Boy here that, there's no reason to be here besides taking, the light. And so again, he's not really being intelligent or smart or careful about what he's doing. And that is part of Rev's character, right? You put a person in a situation where they are desperate to regain their sense of agency, their sense of control, there will be more reckless actions, right? Of course, reckless actions, the same type that Raven herself possesses, right? Now, another thing about Raven that we essentially notice as well is that she still holds a strong social connection to positive reinforcement, right? So whenever someone like Mark dotes on her, or whenever the Venets in the pilot episode He'll talk about how silly she is for doing this and that, right? Again, there's no sense of consequence towards that action, which is what I predicted was going to happen when it comes into Rev in general, both in his character analysis video and in the pilot as well. We see that a big part of his character is that, especially during his past, there really didn't seem to be a level of consequence. Sure, you have the traditional parental aspect of both his mother and father saying that, like, he needs to get out there and he needs to do X, Y, and Z, right? But again, that's not really something we hear that often, right? They treat everything that he does as a learning opportunity, everything that he does as something that is positive, something that should be praised. But again, when you have far too much positive reinforcement in a child's life, there isn't really a difference between good or bad, or really a limitation that we essentially go through. And so, when it comes into Rev as a person, he really doesn't hold a sense of an immediate attempt at right or wrong at all, for that matter, right? And what ends up happening is that when a child is not given those proper barriers, those proper variations, there's really nothing that's giving them a chance to really learn from their experiences, right? And so with Rev, that has to occur within this academic environment, right? The social area around him. And so, of course, he becomes self-destructive, right? But that's after learning his entire ability. And so what happens is that you essentially have so much contextual positivity that's really given to you that there's really no sense of direction towards anything that can happen, right? And so because of that, right, his sense of moral balance is shaky, non-existent at work, right? Because without a proper balance between anything that can happen, there's really nothing about his situation that really allows him to really pretty much understand what it is that he's doing, right? Now, Raven doesn't really have that, right? Raven holds a strong social commitment towards those that essentially want to be kind to her. So there's really nothing that is all that situational as well. Oh yeah, let's look at this scene here. I actually do want to see what Professor Lovecraft says here about him.
You seem oddly purposeful for someone typically reserved, Mr. Vennet.
Yeah, well, you're just imagining things.
Then I also must be imagining that faint scent of disturbed grave soil.
You are?
You know, Mr. Vennet, it might do you well to take part in an extracurricular activity to occupy your downtime, if you happen to find yourself so bored.
This part is one that I want to come back to once we get into episode 3, because if you recall from our Sera video beforehand, a big part of Sera's mentality is that she is pretty much governed by the state of boredom. That is why she's able to help Rev with so much of his requests. That is why she is pretty much down to do anything at any point in time because of her sense of boredom. Nothing has ever captured her interest, of course, until Rev shows up and does what he does in episode 3. We already know much about that. However, here it is interesting because of the fact that he even says that if you're feeling so bored, maybe an extracurricular activity will allow you to really find yourself, busy, right? Give you some busy time in general. And of course, that is true, right? Extracurricular activities allow us to stimulate our own entire perception of the world around us, right? It allows us to really become more communicative, especially if it is a social activity, such as playing board games, even joining a sport, which Rev says, of course, is not his own thing. But it's all about the attempt to really mitigate a response from a person, right? And Lovecraft, as we know, is someone who cares deeply about his students being comfortable, right, and being safe in this environment. And a big part of that entire idea is that no matter what really happens, there really isn't a perception that is going to be without that mentality either. With Rev, there's nothing really stopping him from joining an activity and finding himself busy. But the thing about him is that he does not want to be distracted by these things, right? He sees all of these events as distractions, stopping him from his main endeavor, right? He is narrow focused, right? He jumps headfirst into everything that happens when he is in a desperate state of trying to regain his sense of control. And because of that, extracurricular activities aren't really something that would really interest him due to that simple fact that it interferes with his main goal. Unless, of course, as we're about to see, it leads him into an easier way to accomplish his task, which is to find Sebastian. So let's continue hearing what he says.
Already tried football. Not my speed.
Then why not join one of Cade's multitudinous clubs?
Clubs? Like what?
Well, there's the Debate Society, Occult Studies, Cryptid Cooking, the Tabletop Consortium.
Tabletop Consortium?
That would be our role-playing game enthusiasts.
Ah, perfect. Sign me up.
Really? That's...
Right? And again, like, it's something that, like, oh, well, obviously, right, he would question why would Rev be so interested in signing him to a club, right? He's been so defensive, so stubborn about pretty much interacting at all with anyone, right, unless it benefits him in his goal, that it feels weird to have him join something, right? But also, that entire club is also something that makes sense. A big part of tabletop role-playing games, like, of course, D&D, one of the biggest ones. I'm a big personal fan of Dungeons & Dragons myself, but a big part of tabletop role-playing games, or role-playing games in general, is that it allows you to put yourself into a perspective of your idealized version of yourself, right? Most times, and now, of course, it is telling a story, and to tell a story, you need a proper character, an avatar that represents your attributes both mentally and emotionally, and from that, you're able to become someone entirely new, right? Of course, becoming anonymous is something that, of course, is a really big, it's a double-edged sword, right? Either we become overly anonymous and we no longer find our actions really having consequences, or we become anonymous and become this idealized version of ourselves, which allow us to really create a sense of self-reflection. Now, of course, Rev does not fit any of these entire categories, which would explain why Lovecraft is so questioning. Rev already does not see consequences for his actions because of his positive reinforcement in terms of his contextualization, his childhood, and being raised by parents that are constantly doting on him as well. And due to the given fact that he does not want to create a sense of self-realization or self-actualization or even self-reflection, due to the simple fact that he does not care about anything that will lead to his development because it has nothing to do with his main endeavor and task at hand. Even when he's pretty much doing nothing, he's mostly just trying to find another way to end his life throughout a lot of the series, right? Because again, that is his main task, right? He has a primary task and a secondary task, right? Secondary task is to look into the common area of his social circle and try to figure out, okay, what can I use to better achieve my primary task, right? Which again creates an interconnectivity between the primary and secondary task in general. And again, that's all Rev really cares about because it's all about finding his own sense of control. Once again, you see me saying that a lot, but again, that's a big part of Rev's character in general, right? So his primary goal is connected through dependency or benefit of the secondary goal in terms of everything that essentially happens, right? But because Rev does not fit either category of what role-playing games are really supposed to do in terms of our actualization of our own identity of the self, again, like, there is a question of, like, really, that's the one that you care about? Again, you know, it's entirely all about not really believing that Rev is truly interested in these kind of things, obviously. But again, Lovecraft will still do his job as a teacher and still allow him to try that out. If it does work, of course, okay, that's great. If it doesn't, it's not anything new, right? Again, he knows someone like Sera, someone who has spent hundreds of years and never really connected or joined any kind of activities in general because of her sense of boredom and her monotony of life in general. But again, like, that is a big part of
The one that caught your attention?
Yep.
Well.
Where is it?
Well,
And again, like, that essentially insinuates a large part of his entire idea behind a lot of these different moments as well, right? And, you know, there is this kind of dramatic aspect to it all, right? But again, like, a big part of Rev's character here is simply the fact that it's entirely part of his attempt to garner a anchoring to whatever moment he is within as well. Also, yeah, it is funny to see Sam Otori here as well as the demon guy and the ghost guy here as well. You can say a lot about those kind of things, honestly, but it's not really part of a characterization we know too much about, since again we seldom see these characters in general, and when we do, it's like for short moments as well. Once again, we see there Raven being reckless once again, but again, like, it's really, really interesting to really hold this entire situation through that perception of what Rev is able to do as well. And again, you can see that I'm talking far less for this episode. That's what I'm really talking about, is that this episode, again, you do not have, and there's just really not much to really focus on, right? Because it feels like a more mission-oriented episode than anything else. Which, yes, you could argue episode 3 is particularly just a mission-oriented episode with them trying to escape from the mirror dimension, the void. But again, like, there's really not much. Right? There's really not much I can say about this episode in general. And of course, we're about to see the kitchen scene with Wendy, of course, as she's there. Which is pretty cool to see that, like, Wendy's still actually. I mean, look at her; she's the one who's actually, like, inside the kitchen for her own reasoning. I mean, we don't really know, right? Maybe she is preparing food for other students, like Rev does later on, or I guess he's really more so giving the food for students. But it is the situation that's there as well, right? And here again, Wendy's not physically doing any of these things, right? She is, of course, trying to entertain this entire idea behind things as well. The main thing that I can say about this, however, is separate meanings behind each character. Right? Let me actually go back for a second. All the way back to when we see each one of their gravestones, because Sebastian Reeds is exactly the person that I'm looking for. Minotaurus. And Harapori. Now, why am I focusing on these three students? Other than the fact that they are, of course, the main focus of this entire episode. Well, it's because I believe, right? And again, I am not Rick Cipher. I am not any of the staff or writers, so I do not know their reasoning behind all these characters being here. But if I were to guess, I think it's also because of the simple fact that each one of them represents a more excessive primary aspect of what Rev himself could become if his state of mind is incredibly unbalanced. Right now, it's not necessarily what we said before, where we said that he gets desperate and he becomes reckless. This is different. This is essentially like what would happen if Rev had primarily focused on this part of his character and nothing else, keeping him in check. Well, again, with Sebastian Reed, as we just saw right now, a big part of his entire personality is that he is incredibly fascinated with the aspect of death and killing people, and he is willing to continuously do it because it gives him a sense of rush, right? Now, of course, this is sometimes what we call a power trip, but it's also a vice of death. Now, in philosophy, I know we are diverging a bit from psychology, but in philosophy, a big part of the elements of Aristotle is that he creates a philosophy that talks about the vices of any attributes that we essentially share. Now, what exactly does that mean? Well, it essentially means that a big part of his entire character is about trying to find an aspect of balance. However, as people, as human beings, as humanoid beings in the situation, we have our own set of principles and limits that we reach. For example, if we put hard work as a attribute that we want to have, if we put too much hard work into our situations, right, we end up becoming obsessive, right? Let's call it obsessiveness. That becomes a negative vice of our situation. If we don't put enough hard work into anything we do, that becomes laziness, which is, of course, the minimized vice. Not necessarily positive because of the fact that both sides are both negative. But we have the excessive side, obsessiveness, and we have the minimized side of laziness. Now, these three characters, I feel personally that they represent these different vices of what Rev can essentially achieve. That's why Rev is so uncaring about them, because of the fact that they do not have a balance in that kind of personality. Now, I will argue, as we're going to see with Haripuri, she's pretty much the only one that's, because we spent a longer amount of time with, you kind of get a bit of sense of personality, and that's when she returns back all the way in, I want to say, I think it is episode 7. I want to say 7. When we get to it, we'll see that again. But again, she's the only one who's really given more screen time, and I wouldn't necessarily say that makes her any more important, because like I said before, episode 2 doesn't really give us much. Like, I'm really pulling on straws here, just figure out anything to say, even though this is something that I feel is a bit purposeful in their design of characters as well. But again, like, each one of them has his entire moment. Sebastian Reeds is all about power trip, right? That is why he goes into role-playing games. That is why he has a sense of control. He can make critical roles. He can make actions that allow him to choose a direction of choice that he makes. Because again, in real life, that's something he tried to do, and of course, that ended up killing him, right? But again, he still goes into that role-playing club because, again, it gives him a sense of power trip. Again, that's the initial attribute of being anonymous that we talked about as well, right? That you have no sense of concern or consequence or morality within any of the actions that you essentially have within yourself, right? That's why his vice represents the negative side of death. With Rev, he's focused on controlling death, ensuring that his entire sense of will is within the undead itself, right? But again, he does not use that all the time, right? He uses it as a title to make himself feel important, but there's no physical action that he has. Yes, he is going around killing his students, but this is because it's a consequence of the action that he himself committed. Sebastian Reed, it does not matter if it is within his own entire will or something else. He cares about death because of the fact that it gives him a rush. Rev is not like that at all. Rev actually has these rules that needs to be followed, right? The rules of necromancy, the rules of controlling death, is not something that can be used willy-nilly, and that's something that he knows. That is something that he cares about, and that is something that allows him to be as intelligent as he is in practicing the dark arts, the black magic, if you will. It's simply for that entire fact. Now, what about Minotaurus? Well, as we saw, Minotaurus is a big, airhead, the typical jock, right? The typical, dummy, strong man of the group as well. But again, he's also somebody who focuses primarily on being the best and being strength, right? So what does that mean? Well, again, it's another aspect, right, on becoming the best, which, as we call, it's the vice of pride, which again is an immediate connection to Rev. That one doesn't even need to be explained that much, because of the fact that we even said, what is his main thing? Well, again, his primary goals are always before anything else, right? He's incredibly independent, but again, he also has a sense of egoism, right? Because he's desperate to be unique and to be separated from the common person. And that's exactly what Minotaurus does, right? He explained that he killed the rest of his competition because he wanted to be the only one who was the best, and they were always slowing him down. With Rev, that's the exact same perspective that he essentially has, right? We kind of see a slight bit of that, I would say, in episode 7, due to the fact that he's consistently pushing everyone aside, because, of course, that is, of course, him trying to accomplish his goal of finding the necromancy, the Necronomicon, and trying to gain this entire power and this entire control over his situation so that he can probably find a way to escape, or at the very least just kill himself in general and undo the curse that was placed upon him by, his parents. Now, with Hanapuri, as we're going to see later on, is a bit more of a difficult situation to really find ourselves within. She's definitely the more dramatic out of the two, out of the three. But again, it's not without an entire situation that essentially occurs here. Now, let's listen to Mark's concern, because that is one of the things I forgot to mention. So I mentioned Mark like a slight bit at the beginning of this episode, but we don't necessarily have an episode that focuses just on Mark, right? The pilot focuses on Rev because he's our main character. It gives us our sense of perspective, our perception that we're going to see the rest of the series within, right? In episode 2, this episode, we don't really know who's there, but I would say if we count this as Mark, episode 3 as Sera, episode 4 as slightly bit of Belladonna, although that does come back in episode 6. Episode 5 once again talks about Sera, but it's a dynamic between Sera and Rev. You could argue that episode 4 then is just a dynamic between Belladonna and Rev themselves. And of course, then the finale is just primarily all about Rev's connection with all three of the main friends that he has made throughout this entire situation, right? Quote unquote friends, Rev would never admit that, but again, it's all about the connection he shares. But let's see Mark here, somebody who is overly concerned about other people, less than really himself. Though that's not necessarily always going to be true, as we're going to see in episode 3 as well.
One to go.
Oh, this is getting out of hand, buddy. Maybe we should go find a teacher?
Absolutely not. I've gone this far. I'm finishing it.
Rev, you can't keep killing people like this. It goes against everything Cade stands for.
Screw this school.
I understand that you're doing this for your cat, but I promise I can keep her alive.
I don't care about the cat!
Rev, just let me help.
I don't need your help either. In fact, I'm gonna go kill that last ghoul myself.
And again, that's always the interesting thing about Mark's character. And again, eventually when we get into episode 8, maybe they will do something with it. But, and nothing against the writers of this series or nothing against the choices that are made. This series is just so good for a Minecraft roleplay series, right? But a big part of Mark's character is that he yearns for a sense of connection, right? And of course, because he trusts people so much, because of his gullible nature, he is, unable to tell whenever somebody just doesn't want him around, right? I will argue that, I think Mark definitely has the weakest characterization, and that's simply because of the fact that, again, there's not really much that's done with him. He even mentions all the way in episode 7 that, he hasn't really had time to speak with Rev one-on-one because most of the other episodes is about Belladonna or Sera or just Rev doing his own thing, right? He's never really given Mark the time of day at all, right? And so again, it's one of those things where maybe in episode 8 we will get a situation where Mark becomes that main voice of reason, right? He definitely is the kind of heart of the main cast of 4 characters that we follow the stories of, right? But again, Mark is a very optimistic individual. We said before that when it comes into the 3 notions of being within Cade Academy, Mark definitely represents the aspect of optimistic beliefs, right? That no matter what happens, you can always be a better person. In fact, he believes in Cade's situation and Cade's entire message so much so that he tells Rev that, you can't do this because it goes against the entire point of being within the school, right? And whether or not he was forced in the school or he came in his own accord, right? If you want to become a better person, if you want to cooperate with other people, you have to be open-minded. You can't just be going around and committing these actions. You have to take a time to pull yourself back, look at the present moment intense, right? The present moment around you, and make proper decisions, right? But again, Rev doesn't want that, right? He doesn't care about that. He just cares about accomplishing his goal because that is his entire persona. That is his entire situation. It's all about accomplishing something that makes himself feel in control, that makes himself feel better about being taken away from his sense of independence, right? About being put into the situation, and that's exactly what he wants. But again, Mark and Rev are always this kind of push and pull dynamic, right? That every time Rev pulls away, Mark pushes himself back onto that, right? Because again, it is that entire situation, right? We could call Mark a people pleaser, we can call him an optimistic, airheaded person, right? You can call him whatever you want, but the fact of the matter being that his entire behavior is intrinsically linked to Rev's, right? Every time Rev decides to do something that is reckless, something that may go against the rules, Mark is there to try to bring him back, tell him that we can go through this another way. And that is why I think the only part of this episode that I find to be the most important is the entire speech that Mark gives to Rev at the end. In fact, I even use that in one of my other videos because it is such a good speech dictating what it is that Rev is, right? And how Mark connects to him so much so because of the fact of his own childhood. It's about being someone who is unnoticed, right? Within his many brothers and siblings, there's no shortage of moments where Mark is just by himself, right? And we don't really know what it is that will lead to that entire scenario as well. Final matter being that You guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe his voice actor in the Discord had also posted an image in one of the blooper reels for this episode exactly, I believe, of Mark just writing down something in his notebook. And, I don't believe it's canon, but it showed that inside the notebook, it's just all these negative messages about him not wanting to be here, about him starting to hate like all these things and being so stubborn or being so irritated at Rev's stubbornness towards providing assistance, And, that is just part of Mark's character, right? He wants to help, but Rev doesn't allow it, right? And that is the dangerous thing about these kind of relationships and dynamics, right? That it is, in a sense, almost like a toxic friendship, right? Where the opposing attributes, the opposing wants and needs of one person will lead to a strengthening on the opposite perspective of that as well. We talked about the vices right now, but again, in a sense, you could argue that these relationships are these vices themselves, right? Rev is an entirely different person from who Mark is, because Rev does not care about all these different rules or regulations or moral principles that need to be followed. He just cares about accomplishing something, because then it gives a big old middle finger to Principal Viviana, right? He's not going to care about what he needs to do to get it to happen, because when it does happen, it is going to feel so good. It is going to feel so nice. It is going to feel like he has accomplished something that no one else has, especially because that is true, especially with these students. With Hannah Purr, with Sebastian Reeds, with Mino Torres, all of them had done their own things, right? They're not trying to escape the school. They are pretty much adopting it. But because of that, it led to their entire deaths, right? And Rev just sees that as like a silly thing to happen. That's why he doesn't care about how they died, because there's nothing prominent within it, right? It is just an event that occurs in everyday life. Well, not every single moment here, of course, but like the deaths are really similar to what occurs within the human world, right? And so again, it is such a strong foundation that he has. But Rev's independence keeps him grounded. It keeps his malleability really rigid, and it makes him stubborn to any format of change that Mark, that Lovecraft, and even Belladonna later on wants to provide towards him. And because of that, that's of course going to lead to him making reckless choices at times. But again, these main cast of characters are going to be there to help him out, because again, that's exactly who they are. Something that we're going to see once again when we get to episode 7.
Bud, just slow down a sec and talk to me.
Out of my way, vampire. I have work to do.
Okay.
He gets it, because that's who he is. He gives people a
I
chance
just
to
gotta find that
help
last ghoul and then... Is that... Sera? Hello?
Oh, hi.
What are you doing?
Sitting.
I see that. Is... that all you're doing?
Pretty much. Did you want to join?
A bit busy at the moment. Actually... 2 questions. First, do you know where the auditorium is?
Yes.
Great. Second, do you have any moral objections to murder?
No.
Serious?
Right. And Rev is, of course, surprised by that, considering that she is supposed to be a seraphim and an angelic being. But yeah, that's why I said like one of my favorite dynamics ever in this entire series is Sera and Rev, due to the simple fact that, again, Sera's literal mentality is something that allows Rev to accomplish it. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say that they are overly similar, due to the fact that, as we see in episode 3, Rev is a person of action versus Sera, who is more so a woman of inaction, But again, like, they have similar approaches to the situation, because with Rev, it's all about like, I have no moral obligations and no moral problems with doing these things, because it allows him to accomplish my goal. Sera, on the other hand, could not care, because she's all about not really committing to any action whatsoever. So if someone dies, they die. It's just part of the natural cycle of life, right? As he's about to say here, actually.
Seriously?
Mortals die every day. Premature termination of life is just a symptom of existence.
And again, it's a technical view of life. It's not necessarily wrong in terms of her reasoning, right? It is a wrong perspective to have if you're looking at it through a moral lens. But again, this isn't a normal, average, everyday human school, right? So we can kind of excuse it as like something that makes a lot of sense in general. To be fair, I mean, we see that a lot, like and it's not saying like, oh, Wendy is like evil in that regard either. But it's to say, like, especially in Wendy's case, she does not really care about the aspect of whatever conflictions or wants or needs other people have, because of the fact that she's just living in her own kind of, fear space, as we kind of talked about before. But again, this is the technical truth towards Sera's entire character as well. It's like, there is no moral aspects behind it, right? With Rev, it's like, I don't care if people die because, if they're in my way, then they're in my way. Right? I have to accomplish my goal, and therefore any obstacles must be purged. With Sera, it's like, I don't care because, through technical lenses, everything dies eventually. So if a person dies beforehand, it's just like, that's just part of life. She's been around for so long that that's just a symptom of her immortality, as we know. And of course, the third perspective, as we saw, was Mark's one, which is that no, like, killing people is bad because, again, like, that goes against the entire point of developing yourself as a good person. And so, again, like, he uses that as a reason to try to, rein Rev back. But again, it's not going to work because, Rev is just, he's just Rev. I mean, that's just part of his character.
Cool. So, want to help me murder a ghoul in the auditorium?
Is this what you do during free period?
Occasionally.
Fine.
Okay, trust you know the way then. So this is the theater. Ah, there she is. That's the last school. What is she doing on the stage?
There you are! I've been waiting so long for you, my co-star!
What?
I knew you'd come for me eventually. After all, I'm the one holding your precious amulet!
Of course, it's the third one I check.
Come, my darling. I've set the stage for our performance!
Whatever. What are you doing?
Being the audience?
Alright, whatever. Just handle this myself. Shouldn't be that hard. It's just an undead. Just have to make them read.
And of course, that plays a mind into Rev's entire character. He undermines other people. And we already saw that, like, he does not give people a sense of independence in terms of his recognition of them. It is just a huge part of just the way he works in general. So, again, nothing that surprising, nothing that different that we haven't seen already in terms of his just characterization as a person. He puts himself in front of other people. He does not give people their own kind of, name half the time. It's mostly just whatever creature they are, right? And there's no real sense of like respect, equal respect that's given, unless it is in a situation where there is a basis of respect, as we talked about here as well. One of his big things is that there is a fairness for the sense of benefit. That if someone helps them, then they should be able to just do whatever they want. Right? There's no real problem with that in general, right?
He dead.
They still had all the set pieces, even after all this time.
What are you on about?
My star performance. The one that made me the best actress the school had ever seen.
What, when you died in Act 2?
No, when I killed in Act 2.
Yeah, this one didn't catch me by surprise.
I was Lady Macbeth, and our main actor couldn't hack it. So, I decided to give the audience what they wanted. Realism. I killed King Duncan! The audience roared as his blood pooled on the stage. Oh, it was beautiful.
I'm sure it was. Now it's your turn. Again.
Oh, no. No. See?
And so, when it comes to Hannah Purdy here, right, what is then her vice? Well, again, she wants to be the best, right? She wants to be the only person who can make this role, but it's also about becoming the best in that talent that she essentially has, right? And what do we really call that? Well, again, it's not necessarily a sense of pride. You could argue that there are, of course, prideful and egotistical beliefs. In fact, the matter being, I think even elitism in this case would be the proper definition as to what it is that she is feeling. But when it comes into her entire situation, I think it is essentially being known as different, right? She said that the previous person who was essentially the main role in the play that they were performing, right? That person couldn't really, act the role, right? So she ended up, of course, killing him and giving the audience this realistic aspect of what they essentially wanted, right? She created a sense of a show that, was bigger and better than everything else, right? And again, it's a performance, right? But in this case, I think it is the vice of recognition. Now, why that? Well, it's simply because of the fact that she wants to be recognized for her talent. She wants to be recognized for everything else that happens. So, of course, she puts on this performative stance, right? She makes everything realistic. She gives the audience what they want at the expense of her moral obligations and her moral situation, right? And of course, that is, of course, far different from what Rev wants, right? Rev, yes, he is prideful. He cares about being a necromancer and being understood. That is essentially his main entire thing. That is exactly what he wants. However, again, he doesn't put that above anything else. He doesn't put on a performative stance on that, right? You could argue, however, that at the end of the pilot episode, he does technically do that, especially because he's talking to the janitors through that kind of lens of like, I am a narrator and you guys are just undead. You guys should obey me, right? Because again, that's its entire perspective, right? There's not really that much of a line of reasoning that can come from that besides what he really is as a person, right? So again, like it's just one of those moments where it's entirely there. So now we have, of course, all three of these entire different characters in general, right? A sense of a vice of death, a vice of pride, and a vice of recognition. Something that goes against Rev's entire standard as well, mostly because of the fact that recognition, while yes, he will boast about who he is if he's talking to a person, he doesn't necessarily do that when it comes to a large audience like the way Hannah Purdy does to the audience of her show on the night that she died, right? Because we see Rev talking to the entire, large amount of people at the end of the first episode, and he doesn't boast about who he is. He just says that all of them, suck, and he hates being here, and blah, 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 right? It's airing out negative emotions, his agitation and irritation towards the entire scenario that he's within. But again, it's not about putting on a performance, right? It's not about showcasing this level of extreme recognition by everybody, right? He just does that to Belladonna because Belladonna questions his entire his sense of responsibility and who he is as a person, right? And he showcases a level of entitlement when it comes into just any undead creature in general, right? When he makes his own clone, and then of course, as we just said later on, when he fights the janitors in the pilot episode. And so again, it's a sense of recognition, but only whenever it comes to a state of being needed. And that's the thing with Rev, is that, as we said before, he has a strategic plan as to how everything essentially works, no matter what really happens at all at the entire point in time. Because as we said before, he's both advantageous and strategic about what he does, right? He's not going to go out there and just say, I am a necromancer, you obey me, blah, 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 right? Because again, he knows that it doesn't work, right? And Rev works in the aspect of trial and error, right? He'll try whatever he can to escape. He will try whatever he can to die, because that is entirely his main point of view, is that I will not let this place define who I am, because that is exactly what his own role is. And so, then of course you have the vice of pride, right? Minotaurus is prideful. He killed everyone else because he wants to be the best of the best, right? His competitive spirit overtook his sense of social morality and sociological commonality with the rest of the student body. And so he killed everyone else because of the fact that he wants to just be the best of the best. With Rev, he's not going to push everyone aside unless they happen to be in his way. He's not against killing people, as we just said. But again, he's not going to do it willy-nilly because, again, there's no benefit to it, right? He works in a strategic thinking of whatever will benefit him in general, right? And if a person helps him, then he's able to be like, okay, well, you can still reap some of the rewards if you want, if there are enough to be given. But of course, in this case, freedom is more of a conceptual reward, so it's pretty much infinite, right? And so again, that is part of his entire thing. And of course, the vice of death is essentially his behavior and perception towards death, right? He wants to place a hold on it, a control over it in general, right? He's not really obsessed with it. He's not necessarily fascinated by it. He's more so in a state of authority over something that can be controlled by his own entire admission of truth in his entire situation, which is that he is on top of everything, that he can oversee everything and ensure that things aren't going against his plan.
I'm reprising my role tonight. And you, my dear co-star, are my first victim!
Ah! What the? come down here!
Scream, my dog!
And again, it's just more so an element of, again, him just trying to do something else there. And him asking, of course, Sera for help, right? Another reference to, of course, the last episode 2 when he does the same thing at the end. But this time, she's not going to help. And, of course, he starts trying to chase her, to kill her off, which, of course, leads us all the way to the balcony, which leads to, of course, the scene that we mentioned beforehand.
And then I'm gonna put you back underground.
Whoa! What are you gonna do with that knife, Rev?
I'm clearly going to stab her, Mark.
No, dude! I can't let you do this!
Why?
Yeah, why?
Because! Rev, this isn't who you are!
You have no idea who I am.
And that statement is obviously true, right? That, like, they haven't really known each other for that long. And even with the time that they have spent together, there's never really been a conversational standard where it allows you to really recognize what another person is, right? Because that's essentially what we have, right? Is that we have a sense of assumptuous nature that the person that we are close to is someone that we know more than, like, anyone else, right? And again, that goes against what Rev is saying, right? You don't know who I am. Only I, have a sense of identity, right? I know my identity. I know who I am, and I know what I want. And you don't, right? So how dare you say that you know who I am? You have no idea who I am as a person, right? Because again, Rev does not want to be psychoanalyzed. He does not want to be found out by, like, this person, right? Someone like Mark, who of course he has a stronger sense of irritation towards, right? He doesn't want to be seen as just this, like, weak little person, right? But again, like, Mark is also someone who's really good at just convincing other people to act in a certain way, especially if it is in their own benefit.
Maybe not. But do you know what I see when I look at you?
Not really.
I see a kid just like me. Scared, angry, homesick, doing anything he can just to feel like he's in control.
And what does that necessarily mean? Well, again, as we're going to see in the next episode, in episode 3, when it comes to Mark and his, of course, familiar situation, it's the simple fact that, again, he is considered to be just part of the sibling group, right? And there are a lot of siblings in his family, obviously, but again, it's the fact of the matter being that, like, he wants to, just like Rev, feel in control of his situation, right? And that does make him sad. That does make him scared. That does make him angry. That does make him want to go back home because of the fact that when he's here, he's not any different from any other one of his siblings, right? He doesn't have a sense of identity that is beyond that. Even if he is the only one who's, like, happy-go-lucky or whatever the case is, right? There's not really much that, like, his father or their assistant, I think, as assistant or butler, whoever he talks to in episode 3, right? That, like, there's nobody who can really appreciate that because, again, they live in an environment and in the world where that morality is secondary to just living your life, right? And when we live our lives just like we do in real life, we tend to be more independent, more closed off from any level of adoration or admiration we feel towards other people, right? And again, like, it creates this sense of control and identity that we have within ourselves because, again, it allows us to just really feel like we belong in a certain environment, right? And in a sense, he's saying that is what Rev is trying to do. He's trying to cement a sense of control by doing all these things, right? By acting out, by creating a sense of departure from a world where he is just seen as part of the flock, where he is just seen as, again, like Viviana says, right? He's just another student of hers, right? And he's trying to differentiate that, and he does so by acting out, because that is his entire perspective, right? If he does that, if he does one more thing, it's entirely there. And again, we are going to see that exact behavior become a higher format of that obsession all the way in episode 5 when he escapes attention with Sera multiple times. It's all about creating a sense of action, right? Again, trial and error, again and again and again. The only thing that it will lead to would of course, be a sense of insanity when you expect a different result and it does not occur, right? But again, Red does not care because, again, his mentality, his endeavor-searching brain of his will not allow him to take a step back, will not allow him to stop because of the fact that he is so desperate to get out of the situation. And no matter how many times people try to talk to him, no matter how many connections or friendships he makes, that priority, no matter what the secondary goal is at the end of the series, that primary goal is his one and only, right? Now, I'm sorry, in episode 8 that's going to change, but so far throughout the episodes, all the way up until episode 7, that has been his main priority in general. It has been to either kill himself or to escape this place. He knows that the latter can't happen, so the former is gonna have to be pretty enticing at this point in time. But still, Mark is somebody who is able to convince a person because of the fact that not only is Mark genuine in what he says, but he's also really optimistic about the future in general, like we said, right? His entire perception of Cade is that it's not a prison the way that Rev would see it, but like Lovecraft says, it could be something different. Perhaps a new home, perhaps a new community that he can rely on to not judge him, to treat him in a proper manner, and to pretty much become this almost secondary family as a home away from home, essentially.
That's not.
That's why you summoned Raven here, and why you don't want to lose your amulet. You keep rebelling so hard because you're homesick. But listen, Rev, you're not alone in this dump anymore. You've got me. You've got Raven. And Sera. I think, anyway. Look, I kept my promise, didn't I? Raven made it through the day without dying. So you don't need to risk everything over that amulet anymore. Let's just go to Lovecraft. And let him fix this before it gets worse. How does that sound, buddy?
Stupid. And completely inaccurate.
Reflection, but
I guess it's easier than the alternative.
and I love this scene because of the fact that it's not Rev saying like, "Oh, you are completely right. I am homesick," or like, "I guess you're right. I guess I am a bit." No, no, no. He is still sticking to those reins that he is not at all this kind of babyish person. But again, similar to the pilot with what he does with Sera, it's easier than trying to struggle to do all these different things. And so again, that's his exact position, is that it is easier to be socially active. It is easier to be socially dependent, as long as it's not overly dependent, of course. Similar to Mark, I would say. But it is more easier to do something with the help of other people than to do everything on your own. And that's always been the truth of any part of the world in general. But again, that is a big part of his entire character, is that he does not want there to be just... He doesn't want there to just be a single way of doing things, because he knows that that can't help. He may have a single priority, but the method of where he can get to that place, now that is strategic, that is smart, and that is an easier way of going through this, because again, it creates a path forward that makes it so much simplistic to reach the goal that he's trying to reach. At the end of the day, it's all about the goal. It's all about the goal. It's all about trying to figure out what it is that he's going to do to reach that point in his life where he can do anything he puts his mind to, you know?
Such a moving performance. I've been touched. Young man, here, you can have your amulet back.
Really? Thanks! Here, let me get that for you, Rev.
My encore!
Holy freaking crap! I killed her!
Good job.
I already tried this one, Mark. What?
Well, what do we have here?
What the? Hey! Get it back, you imp!
Finders keepers, loser! You want it? Come get it!
That's it!
No! Rev! Not again!
See ya.
Dang, Pete!
Get good with my amulet!
I got
Here.
Hey!
How about I use it for you? Nakia!
Ah, crap.
You killed...
Go
It was...
get your...
Those ghouls would have ended up inside this school. And we both know that Miss Wendy Indigo had nothing to do with that. Right?
I was there before, like, the thing about, Wendy's actions and being in an environment for monsters. It makes sense that, like, yeah, her actions wouldn't be as severe as, of course, what Rev did, because, her actions don't really break the rule as long as they, I guess, don't really kill anybody. But to be fair, I mean, these students weren't really punished for that either. So, who really knows, right? But again, the entire point is that, like, there is, of course, a difference in the regulations and how this entire school functions as well. But again, the thing about Rev is that, like, he does not care for those things at all. Honestly, right? Again, it's all about paving his path through so he can reach his destination.
Mr. Lovecraft, you can't take Rev's amulet.
And why is that, Mr. Dracula?
See that cat? That's Rev's. She has a hard time staying alive. Without that amulet, well, you know.
Is this true?
Yeah.
Policy dictates I confiscate the offending implement. But how about a compromise? There. Now the amulet is bound to your familiar. I hope you learned a valuable lesson today, Mr. Vennet, in companionship.
See? I told you it would all work out, Rev. Are you kidding me?
And of course, this refers back to, of course, what we said about Mark beforehand, which is the fact that he has a low sense of social awareness and behavioral perception. You know, he sees his actions as just something that will provide a solution no matter what it is that's really going on. The fact of the matter being that I would even say, you know, let's continue here with Mark for a second, right? I would even say that Mark has a similar approach where it is has a narrow-minded behavior pattern towards finding a proper solution to any social conflict. As we're going to see in episode 7 as well, his sense of, let's say, self-preservation is pretty low. But again, for others, it's as high as it can be, right? Because again, he's all about trying to find what will help the person that I care about the most, because it makes me feel good. It makes me feel like I'm in control for what I'm doing. Not to mention something that he's quite, unfortunately, familiar with when it comes into his family dynamics, but even still, again, he is capable of showcasing a stronger sense of awareness and reinforcement towards everything that essentially happens, right? And of course, you know, Rev did not want that to happen, so he's genuinely and understandably pissed off, you know.
I wanted my amulet back, not for it to get attached to my parents' stupid cat! Shut it, you! Now I'm stuck with you forever! And this is all your fault!
What are best buds for, right, Rev?
I hate you.
And so again, for episode 2, like I said before, definitely one of the more weaker episodes, but my God, does it do such a good job of representing Mark and Rev's differences. In fact, the matter being that even represents the dynamics between Raven and Rev, right? The Raven's somebody who is a consistency for that as well. Now, of course, the dynamic between Raven and Mark, I would say it's more so primarily it gives Mark a sense of purpose, of essentially just caring for somebody, right? It makes himself feel like the hero towards her because of the fact that like he consistently has to protect her, right? And again, because of that, it creates a sense of his narrow-minded behavior perception and making himself feel good, right? And again, like it's such a really, really important like quality to really have because of everything else that essentially happens. But yeah, like even still, you know, I think it's just a really, really good episode at portraying what happens when we let those desperations take over, right? But also showcases the perceptions of what happens when we let our own obsessions take over our life. And we have these different vices that essentially just leak out of ourselves because of the fact that we don't really have an anchor like Mark, like Raven, that keeps us from doing something that we may regret far later on. And so I think that that's a really good episode for Mark. But of course, we're going to be heading into my favorite episode of the series so far, which is episode numero 3. And we're back again, dear seekers, to episode number 3 of Freak Show, also known as my personal favorite episode. And it is the episode that had started this entire journey of going over the entire Freak Show series and analyzing its characters for my first ever video that had garnered quite a lot of attention from you all. And so we're going to be getting started with this new episode. Now, much of the information that we have here, I have pretty much placed within this notepad here as well, or at least the pertinent information that we can essentially use to analyze both Rev and Sera in this episode, and a little bit of Wendy too for some reason. But I think this episode is really important in showcasing the dynamics between the three of them together. And it's going to teach us what happens when we put someone who lives their life in monotony versus someone who lives their life in active rage and active action. So let's get started.
So, like, everyone is literally obsessed with me here. It's, like, exhausting. But whatever.
Any second now. You're gonna show up for their stupid cat. Any second. Or not.
And we already start off with this initial assessment of Rev's character, right? Is he upset that his parents aren't showing up for Raven? Or is he upset that they're not showing up because he actually is homesick, the way that Mark had described his sensation at the end of the last episode? Well, I think it definitely is towards the former, because of the fact that, as we know, Rev's entire character is very action-oriented. And he has all these plans and strategies, and of course, if one isn't going according to his entire structure and framework and process, essentially, it is a bit of an annoyance, right? But I don't think it's really anything that is more than that. Not to say that it can't happen or that it doesn't happen. I definitely think that there is some level of homesickness that he has, clearly due to the fact that, again, he is a foreign entity in this new social environment. But, even still, I think it still serves as a fairly insightful way to kind of describe of how he's really feeling at this given moment in time. I don't know if they really do explain how much time has passed between it. I would assume that probably at the very least, I want to say the entire series is taking place in the span of, I want to say, around 2 or probably a week and a half, I would say. I think that's enough time to really develop a kind of routine and pattern, while also kind of seeing this place as its own kind of separate environment from something that is really used to at the same time.
You look like a sorry bump on a log. Where are your parents, boy?
Too busy to show up, apparently. Knowing them, they might have forgotten to come and got wrapped up robbing graves of bones.
Poor you.
Whatever. Can I go now, since this was a complete waste of time?
No. Since you have nothing better to do, that means you have time to clean the attic.
Are you serious?
That's another thing about this entire situation, is that, like, Viviana is literally allowing the parents to talk to the kids in this kind of, reunion situation too, because, as far as we're aware, their stay at the academy is for as long as they are not able to be, like, not really redeemed, but it was reintegrated into society, into the human world, right? And as long as they're not reintegrated and proper, essentially, right? They stay here for as long as they have to. That's what we're about to find out with Sera in this episode too, that she's been here the longest. But, it also showcases that, as I always said, right, while Cade is a place for monsters and the situation is entirely alien, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is too overtly different from, of course, the typical human experience. Now, of course, series like this, right, you'll have Monster High, you'll have the Owl House, right? You'll have situations that are similar to the human academic experience, high school, social dynamics, right? Hierarchy groups, right? Bullies like Wendy, of course. But again, like with all these entire situations, there's still a human quality to it all. And I think that makes it, of course, a lot more sensible to really be there. But of course, Rev is someone who's going to detach from this entire situation. Now, Baba Yaga here, of course, her being a lot more condescending, like, oh, poor you, to his entire situation. Of course, that causes Rev to just immediately go back into his kind of defensive stance, right? But that makes sense. Anybody's going to kind of see our entire situation as, like, unimportant or, like, without real grand quality. I mean, it's entirely there, right? But again, like, the poor you thing, while it is condescending, it also makes sense, because, like we said, a lot of students here have similar experiences. Even Wendy, later on in episode number 5, I believe, has that similar no, not actually episode 5. No, it is episode 7, the newest one for me, because I haven't seen the finale yet. But in episode 7, like, she says the same thing at the end, right? That she's, that he's not the only one who wants to get out of this place, and to act like he is, of course, that just is, like, unfair to other people's experiences as well,
Hop to it, boy, or you'll be hopping as a frog.
But threats still do work on Rev, because, knows, he has enough reason to kind of.
If tetanus doesn't kill me, maybe asbestos will. Fingers crossed.
Oh, she got you too.
You're kidding! Now I have to deal with you too?
And here I was thinking.
Ironically enough, right, there is this, what do you call it? It's kind of almost mirrored version from the reactions here, right? Like Sera is, of course, she lives her life in monotony, right? Nothing is really too surprising for her. And it's like, oh, okay, well, you're here too. Okay, well, that doesn't really, matter as much, right? She's going to say something here that is a bit interesting too. But Wendy is the opposite, right? She's reactionary, right? And that's always the kind of argument between Wendy and Rev's entire, like, dynamic and their situation. They're back and forth of, like, anger and violence and, like, sassiness and all that stuff, right? The difference between the two is that, Rev at times is just someone who is so provocative and someone who's so irritated that he just lashes out at the entire social area around him, right? And because Wendy is also a part of that social area, she'll react to everything that he says, right, in a state of anger, right? But let's see the scene here.
What could be worse than cleaning up a dusty old attic?
Always have to have some kind of smart remark, don't you?
It's not like you make it hard.
I'm confused. Weren't we here to clean?
Right, and again, multiple things to talk about in this case, right? But as we said before, when it comes into Wendy's entire situation, it often is a case of she's reacting because of the fact that Rev is always someone who, like she says, right, has a remark to really give at the same time. Now, this makes sense because, as we said before, right, Rev's entire situation is not being pinned down by any given task or any given assignment that's really imposed onto him, or any kind of really given situation that he doesn't give the consent towards, right? And so here, Wendy is just immediately, like, tired of all his complaining and all his kind of, again, just his comments toward everything, right? Now, of course, that makes sense for multiple reasons. One, Wendy, as we saw in the beginning, is someone who's always kind of just pushed other people to the side, right? As far as we're aware, there really hasn't been any real physical violence as far as we're aware. And she only goes after Rev in episode 1, right, due to the fact that, one, he's a human, but even after she finds out that he's a revenant, it just gives her more of a reason to just be able to hurt him, because that means that, like, no matter what happens, he's always going to come back, right? So he's her own kind of emotional punching bag, if you will. However, right, it's also interesting, second point, as Sera says here, that, like, she is stating that their task was to clean, so, like, why are we fighting at the same time, right? It's not really to de-escalate the situation. Sera doesn't really strike me as a mediator type of person, but it is interesting because, yeah, like, we see Sera, again, be focused on the task at hand. It's like, hey, yeah, weren't we supposed to do this? Like, why are we fighting? Now, she's not overly hardworking either, like Belladonna is, but she is someone who is just really focused on whatever is given to her. But whenever something else happens, she just immediately switches to that entire situation. And, of course, in this case, the argument between Rev and Wendy, and just immediately is like, wait, okay, are we doing this now? Like, what's going on, right? But again, there's no emotional strength to it all, right? But it is interesting, right? But this also makes sense because of the fact that Wendy, as we saw, is someone who has, of course, a fragile sense of social placement. And so when you have someone like Rev, who's always commenting against things, always is being smart and snarky, like she says, again, that creates a friction between the two, right? But again, like, it's an incredibly interesting connection to really have here at the same time, right? Rev is unimportant, but again, it is entirely part of this entire, like, situation of, like, you really think you're better than everyone else, right? Like, everyone here doesn't want to be here. You're like, we, like, Sera, her, and Rev are now in the situation, so why complain more when you can clearly see there are other people in the same kind of position that you are in? Even if they may not be the same people you are, or the same person you are, right? They are within the same consequences of an action that is outside of their control, So again, like, it's an entire back and forth about, like, are you really as important as you say you are? Is this independence, right, isn't an excuse to push other people aside and to push the experiences given by other people away from everything else, So again, it's a really, really interesting comparison.
You think you're all that just because you embarrassed me once.
Way more than...
And again, that's an interesting line because it showcases that, like, with Wendy, there is a very, very, very slight sense of egotistical perception, right? It definitely is more so egocentrism because of the fact that she believes that, like, oh, because you embarrassed me, right, that creates a sense of pride, right? Which already showcases that she puts herself in a higher pedestal as well, because in that case, it's like, oh, well, if you embarrassed me, that and it worked, right? That must mean that now you have the right to be all prideful, which of course she's immediately against, right? But again, there's a misunderstanding of the given situation. But of course, Rev is always going to have a comeback no matter what, because again, he remains his own sense of control. And the fact of the matter being that her being this kind of like enemy essentially towards him makes a lot of sense because of their perceptions of the world. If she believes herself to be like a higher form of authority, right, and Rev believes himself to be like a rebel against the authorization that goes against his own belief system, then of course you're going to have this entire back and forth mirrored version of these ideals, right? Wendy believes like, oh, well, everyone's suffering, so why the hell do you care about, doing this and doing that, right? It doesn't matter to push someone else aside because it's all about them, right? And that's why I said that Wendy, while she is a bully, especially towards Rev, she's not so in the way where it would go against every single principle that Kate kind of gives her as well, right? Wendy still attends classes. She still goes with the rules, right? It's only when she meets Rev and Rev does his whole entire thing without even apologizing or being aware of himself that he start acting a lot more cruel towards him. But again, it's a very, very steep line of what is allowed and what is understood, right? Again, her actions may be reasonable and understandable through our perception, right, as human beings, but it does not excuse her actions toward Rev, no matter if he's immortal or otherwise. The social area dictates that the rules that we impart onto our more, of course, normal world without monsters, therefore, again, mirrors that version into everything else. Right. And again, it's an easier way to really look at this as well here. Hang on. So when it comes into Cade's entire situation here and the themes of the show, think about it in our entire situation, right? So we'll look at the real world versus Cade, right? So in our world, we have bullying is often caused by those who wish physical pain. Typically, nowadays, it is the former versus the latter, due to the fact that, of course, you have stuff like cyberbullying nowadays, right? But you have this emotional and physical pain because you want to hurt other people, right? But the equating factor to Cade Academy is that when it comes into bullying, especially in this case, right, it is the natural instinct of monsters to harm others. Right? Same thing with a sense of hierarchy, right? In normal schools, or at the very least in certain places, like especially elite universities and elite high schools and stuff like that, you'll have a sense of hierarchy, right? You'll have the club presidents, you'll have the club leaders, you'll have, like, especially in, of course, middle school and stuff, you'll have stuff like hall monitors. Again, there is a sense of role and purpose, or responsibility and moral requirement to each task that is assigned to a person. But a hierarchy is used to maintain order. Versus here, the hierarchy of everyone here, we have, of course, Narissa in the beginning of this episode talking about how everyone is so obsessed with her. And of course, Wendy seeing herself as, the world essentially being impacted by whatever, anything bad happens to her. Almost like a karmatic retribution in a sense, but it is more so the reactionary process that happens because of that, right? So of course, here it's saying that the hierarchy in our world is to maintain order and to maintain an aspect of understanding of the rules, right? Again, we're looking at the Leviathan, written by Thomas Hobbes, right, which dictates that need for authority in exchange for resources and stuff. But here, the hierarchy is used to maintain order, which again is mirrored within the aspect of Freak Show's universe and Cade Academy by using a sense of control. Of an absolute social area. Now, in real life, social areas, social environments, just essentially means who are you interacting with. Of course, academic settings like schools, universities, they count as social areas just as much as like a table at a club with your friends. That's a social area, much smaller, but it still exists. And an absolute social area essentially means it is a social dynamic that is controlled by the head of a group, right? We're looking at the typical High School Musical or a typical high school setting where you'll have the popular girl who is essentially in charge of the entire like cheerleading squad, right? She has an iron fist of a rule over it, right? Any trend that she says is going to happen no matter what, right? Again, the Regina and George kind of situation. And here we have those entire things, right? People follow Narissa because she is popular, because she is pretty. And later on, we're going to see that Mark himself is, going towards her, right? Of course, Wendy does not have that. As we saw, she lives in her own kind of bubble of control, right? It is a social area that is primarily for herself. And anytime anyone interacts with her, they enter the social area, and then it becomes her absolute little situation, right? She'll be like, no, I'm not going to give you the seat. No, I do not care about your problems because I am in charge of this entire process, right? This entire interaction that is occurring between us two.
Once. What, can Wendigos not count?
That's it!
Huh. That's not good.
Once again, a monotonous example.
Ow. Stupid Wendigo in the... What the hell?
No, I gotta get on stable ground now.
Just a comment. When I first saw the title of this episode, I actually thought they were going into like a parallel universe, because I believe that is what the title was originally called. I believe they do change the title often for each episode. I think they change it at least once or twice. And I believe the original one was Parallel Universe, which technically speaking, the Void technically is that, as we now know from episode 7. But again, like it's an incredibly specialized way of essentially describing it too.
Okay, this is the first time and last that I'll be trying to jump into the school. Come on.
There's that sense of irony too.
Okay. That was close. Almost fell into the infinite nothingness. Where am I? What part of the school is this? Wait a minute, I think this is the main hall.
What the hell?
You! What the hell did you do, you little freak?
What did I do?
You got us trapped in this... whatever this is.
We're in the void.
Eh?
It's the space outside reality. I guess that mirror was some sort of portal.
Then hurry up and tell me where the exit is.
You think we'd be standing here if I knew where it is?
That is also the thing, right? Does Wendy have a sense of reasoning the way that Rev does? Because Rev is educational. He obviously has proved that he knows, he knows his way around dark magic. He knows his way around understanding the creatures of the school and everything in between. And does Wendy have that same reasonability? Well, I think she does, but it's to a far more basic understanding, right? So the thing about Wendy here is that I think a big part of her entire character is that there also is a sense of survivability, right? I think that a big part of her knowledge of the space around her is the basic survival instincts as well. Right? If she senses that something is going to cause her to not be in an okay situation, like of course here being trapped within a void, she's more willing to do whatever it takes to essentially survive. Of course, as we're going to see, that means even teaming up with Rev. That does not, of course, mean that she's going to accept it or even necessarily follow his rules. It does mean that if push comes to shove, she will, of course, choose that entire stylized way of living. Which is why the first thing she says is just for him to get him out of, to get her out of this entire position that they found themselves within.
Grr! You're the one who got us into this mess, so you have to get me out of it!
Me? This is all your fault!
And therein comes the question between a lot of their arguments that I've seen people have in the comments as well. Is Wendy at fault for a lot of what happens during this series? Well, again, each time we're going to see them fight or have an argument, we are going to, of course, see the entire scenario because of everything else that essentially occurs. And we're going to analyze who is really at fault. Now, of course, this is one of the initial situations. As we said before, I can even have an entire graph depicting each moment, and I probably will have that for the next reaction of the next 2 episodes. But again, there comes this entire question: who was, of course, at fault for this? Well, let's see, right? Rev comes in, immediately makes a complaint. Wendy gets irritated, tells him that he's not, he's not the stuff, right? He's not all the hot stuff of the world. But again, like she says, like, he needs to cut it out. Of course, he keeps prodding at her and provoking her. And yes, technically speaking, she does, of course, end up pushing him to the mirror, which sends both of them into the void. So, physical actions, Wendy. Verbal actions, definitely Rev. So, in this case, let's call it a tie. Let's say that it was a dual effort to end up in this entire situation as well. But, As we know, Wendy can get physical if she gets really annoyed with Rev at the same time. So let's see what happens when they are put into a situation where they have to work together.
That's it. I'm killing you for this, Bennett.
Save your breath, Wendigo. We're in the void. You're not gonna be able to kill me.
But she would anyway.
What?
It's impossible to die here. You just exist. In nothing. Forever.
Tuh, you're lying.
You think I want to spend eternity with you? This is worse than death!
Oh, I'll show you worse.
Why did she take offense to that? Well, of course, she's, again, her identity is fragile, as we said. That's one of her main attributes. And so because of that, she's like immediately like, oh, so you're saying it's bad because I'm here. Okay. Well, I'll show you all of these things here as well. But again, like we see that like her basic survivability allows her to take that moment to kind of ask like, what do you mean the void? What do you mean we can't die here? Blah, 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 which of course that's bad for Rev, as we're going to see in episode 7 when he's actually back in this place, that, living forever and, being in a situation where you can't even control your own kind of death, your own biological processes, it is a terrifying existence to live within as well, at least for like an immortal character, which, I think he's a pretty well-written character in terms of immortality as well. But when he has a fragile identity, right? She doesn't want to be considered to be the sole catalyst behind something that is negative, right? But as we're about to see, when it comes to her interactions with other students, she typically does not care for them as much, which we already know that. She's not really the saint of all social interaction. But you can see that like she has a kind of more commanding presence.
Than death.
Ah! You imp! You realize I'm immortal, right?
Just shut up and die!
God, you're so annoying! What the?
So hungry.
Hey, zombie girl, come here!
Ow.
This is Sam Pottery,
This pillar here.
if I'm correct. It took me a while to figure out
How
the name.
dare you ignore me!
Moron! She can't see us!
No one can, dead or alive.
Where was I going again?
I don't know why I'm asking you for help. You're just as useless as this zombie here.
I am not a zombie! I'm a revenant!
Look at that sentence. I don't think she really even calls him a zombie. Like, she does call him like a ghoul and stuff later on because she knows that it annoys him, so she uses it as a way to get, underneath the skin and stuff. But like, she just says he's as useless as the zombie. She's not necessarily referred to him as a zombie, right? But because Rev is similar to her in the state where he is incredibly prideful of his identity and his sense of control over his situation, he's going to take offense to that because he's like, I'm not a zombie, I'm a revenant, we're different, right? But again, like, as she's, and knowing that she takes offense, she's going to use that now to just immediately, hurt his feelings, right? And then you could argue that there is something to say about her ability, which I think she has already used. No, I think this is the first episode she uses it, actually. Which is her ability to mimic other people's voices and have like an echoey thing as well. That's mostly just something because of the fact, she's a Wendigo. Wendigo typically are all about the psychopathy that is within the human mind when it comes into desperate situations, having to do nasty things to survive in general, right? And so the Wendigos are the consequence of that. And, in a sense, I guess they could mimic other people. Really depends, right? Our interpretation of it versus that of tribal interpretations of what a Wendigo actually is and a skinwalker and stuff like that. Again, very, very different things than what we're seeing here, but like the mimic of voice is also just the fact that like, basic survivability, you take what other people have and you use it to your own advantage. You can kind of see where the thematic element for Wendy Indigo is here as well at the same time.
Don't compare me to that drooling fly magnet!
Oh,
Wendy, you hurt my little zombie feelings. You dare mock me, Wendigo? With my voice? That's it!
Yeah, like you see the exact same thing, right? You dare mock me, just like how Wendy just was trying to tell Samo there, like, how dare you, like, how dare you ignore me, right? Again, there is an equal sense of pride there, which again builds with an additional sense of friction there as well.
There you are.
It's you.
What the? You can see us?
Mm-hmm.
How?
Divine sight, obviously.
Yeah, obviously.
But again, like, of course, that's just Wendy trying to build her own sense of confidence back up too. But again, like the fact that Sera was just able to go to where they were, not like ability wise, at that point you kind of just learn to accept that she can pretty much do almost anything. But like the fact that she was like willing to go and try to find them, I think it was, there is the equal parts of curiosity, but there is the additional equal parts of care that she has towards Rev, definitely. But again, like it is really, really important to really situate her as someone who does not do things unless it is like absolutely necessary, right? And so that's what we're seeing here as well.
I thought you were one of the smart zombies.
Shut up! Sera, I need your help.
Okay.
Listen, there's a ritual I can perform that allows us to jump realities, but it only works on a 1,000-year eclipse. Which, as luck would have it, is tonight.
Snore!
Shut up! This ritual is extremely precise, so I'll need my supplies, which are in my dorm. We need to go get them since you're the only one that can hold things, Angel.
But that is the boys' dorm.
Yeah, so Sera, so I do take back what I said in episode 2, because it's been a few days for me between this episode and the last one. But I do take back what I said before about Rev not using people's names. He technically does use their names. I forget if with Mark he's used it so far, but with Sera he did just call her Sera and then call her Angel. I think it's just like when he's trying to get something done really quickly, he'll just refer to them as like what they are. But when he's trying to get someone's attention or get something done, he'll just say like, their name. Which for Belladonna, I forget what he actually says in episode 4. I think he does call her Witch initially, and then afterwards he calls her Bella and stuff like that. I actually forget if he uses her name at all for a lot of these things. I don't know. It's a really, really interesting situation to find out. And of course, Wendy is just like, saying like this is all just nerdy stuff because, again, she doesn't have that academic prowess and she doesn't really care so long as it works. She doesn't care about the lore, the context, or whatever the case is. It's just if it works and it gets us out, then 1, 2, 3, let's get it done.
So?
I'm not a boy.
That doesn't matter!
Oh, Rev, I can't go to your dorm. We haven't been on a date yet.
Shut up!
Oh my god.
Look, it's not that big of a deal. I'll prove it. Come on.
Okay.
And right here. See? Is it really that different?
It smells worse.
Yeah, fair. What the?
I told you not to talk to me in front of Narissa! Freak!
Alright, but like, yeah, I mean, this part is like quite often just a way to get things done. Red tries to get their attention, everything in between. Let me out, be not afraid, which, ironically, because Sera is an angel. And then, of course, he gets punched by Miss Wendy. But like, yeah. So again, what happens here is entirely there. Now, of course, say what you want about the romance within the show. Again, there is a lot of connection to really be had between Rev and a lot of these characters, right? And I've seen people ship Mark and Sera and Rev. Mark and Rev, of course, one of the more popular ones, and of course the show equivalent or the canon, technically, ship of Miss Belladonna and Mr. Rev. Now, of course, when we get to episode 7, I will see all the differences and dynamics and the connections between all of these characters. Maybe we'll even do that after episode 8. But again, there's a clear sign that Rev can definitely mirror, ironically enough, no pun intended, but he can definitely mirror the characteristics and the needs of each one of the group members, right? Each one of the other 4 characters. But again, like he isn't without his own kind of sense of irritation because he's always an active character, and as we said, he uses active rage to essentially be more action oriented. As we're going to see, there is an irritation with Sera, right? Because Sera just follows whatever is told of her to do, right? And because of that, again, it's a complete opposition to what Rev does, right? We said before in the Sera video that Sera is a really, really monotonous person, but she's definitely really rule-abiding because, again, it's the path of least resistance, which, as we said, is pretty much the path that she takes in general. Of course, Rev is the opposite of that, right? He challenges authority. He does not leave things the way they are because, again, he does not find that to be the exact or most beneficial way to really work around the world, right? So, again, it's a very, very interesting connection to really have. But as we're about to see, Wendy is also someone who is fairly dependent when it comes into her survivability, and of course, she does not like it when Rev's do away from her.
Now I'm stuck with Sera. I gotta go find her. What the? Ah!
You think you can just ditch me? You're getting me out of here, zombie boy, or else.
Not a zombie.
Why don't we just go out the way we came? Through the mirror.
Wait, don't!
Hi-ya!
Reasoning is not in her fortitude.
Damn it, Wendy! You got us sucked out into the void!
You should have said something then!
I tried, you stupid little...
Oh, dear.
What the frickin' crap was that?
Don't know. Don't want to know.
He knows your frickin' name!
Yeah, this is one of those fates worse than death I was talking about.
I'm not getting eaten by whatever that is! Get us out!
I was trying before you got us stuck in here, you idiot!
Get us out, or I'm throwing you down there!
In case you haven't noticed, I can't do anything! That's why we needed Sera!
You called?
Huh?
But again, there's just there's not really much to say, right? It's the same thing, right? Wendy is using her basic survival instincts, and she is trusting Rev to get her out. But again, she's still really peeved off about it, right? So she's grabbing him, saying like, "Oh, get us out, right now." And Rev wants to do the same thing, right? Rev cannot stand people who do not listen to what he has to say. Not necessarily the whole "oh, I am right, you are wrong" kind of deal, even though in this case, of course, he does call her an idiot, but rather the fact that he works with a process, and if you try to steamroll the process through anything else, it does not work. We saw that in episode 2 with Mark trying to get things done as effectively and efficiently as possible by just going to Lovecraft and telling him blah blah blah, right? Well, Rev is like, no, my process is to get these students killed and then get my amulet back. Again, like that, I get to be in control of everything that's going on. If you just tell a authority figure, right, they're going to have their own entire things to say about this, and that ruins everything for me, right? And again, it's just following a process that nobody wants to follow. With Wendy here, it's just all about, I want to get out, get me out, blah, 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 right? And it's all about just the anger that she feels towards the entire situation, while Rev is trying to do things, taking this kind of slow approach, but he is also a bit desperate to do that, as we're about to see. He'll also get pretty irritated with Sera when it comes to her not listening to what he's saying.
You're here?
Or rather, she's not taking much.
Divine sight.
Can you do something?
Yeah.
No!
Oh. Okay.
I think this episode has the most of Rev's crash outs ever, I think. Because I wouldn't, episode 5 has mental break technically, but no, I think that it definitely is a big part of his characterization there as well. Just the fact that he reacts to stuff as just, again, active, do this, do that, blah, 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 right? Again, is it the same thing as basic survival instincts? Kind of, but I think Rev is just following through with his process, right? He has a process of how he gets everything done, and he wants to get that done as fast and as efficient as humanly possible.
You both suck.
Wait,
that's valid.
We're in the boys' storm?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, listen up, Plant. You need to knock that nonchalant crap off, because this is kind of a big deal, and you're not treating it like one. Got it?
Sure.
In a sense, right? And yeah, I think I'll mention it now just in case, because I might have to cut out real soon. But when it comes into her entire situation here, it is actually incredibly important to know what I said before. During the Sera analysis video, which again, go watch it if you haven't watched it yet, but a big part of her characterization in terms of her social dynamics with other people that I described in more so an analogy was the aspect of the worker and the customer, right? Sera, of course, is a worker, right? She has abilities. She has the responsibility to help other people. That was, of course, as we're going to find out, her job before she got placed into Kate Academy. However, she did not care much for the livelihoods of other people, which we saw in episode 2, when she said that death is just a part of the cycle of life. Why would it matter if this person died now or died later, right? my entire help wouldn't have really changed anything, which again is in a sense a similar inevitability mindset that Viviana has in episode 7 when she talks to Rev about it. But the thing about Sera is that there is this situated resolve to not necessarily see things with that much of a urgency, right? Which typically happens with those with an apathetic personality type, right? Now, typically you'll see that with psychopathy and a level of antisocial personality disorder where there is essentially a numbness of emotions. Of course, with the antisocial personality disorder, there is a adaptability to the emotional sphere that is around the person, the crowd, the people, right, to match their personality to better get whatever is really needed in that situation. Sera doesn't have that, of course. She constantly has what we call the monopitch, which is essentially a voice range that lacks a lot of frequency, right? So you often talk very slow or very much without too much of a tonal difference between what you're saying. And so because of that, you'll have a lot of characters, especially in media, you'll see there are quite a few characters that have that kind of mindset as well. Of course, in anime, you'll typically see the archetype of the kuderi, right? A character who typically has minimized emotions besides the person that he connects with the most. And you'll also have characters like, this is going to be sounding like a flashback to a lot of you all, but Monopitch, of course, you'll have a character of Maud Pie, sister to Pinkie Pie, of course, who also has a monopitch kind of tonal frequency. And we do know that she can definitely get out of that frequency, but only in incredibly emotional standards or when she actually wants to situate a resolve to any situation that does practically annoy her, which we know doesn't occur a lot because she's kind of dampened down that irritation at the same time, right? We also mentioned, let me pull up this note here, that one of the big things about Sera is that she has what we call alexithymia, right? Which is essentially a difficulty in understanding the emotions of those around you. Now, typically, this is more so a neuropsychological disorder. Typically happens more physically than a state of extreme stress. But again, it could still definitely apply to her given situation. And so because of that, right, she essentially gives a line of reasoning towards not really being that concerned over what really happens, right? She's a really patient person, as someone who's been, of course, there for hundreds of years. She doesn't really care much about what really would happen. She's still helping him, right? Because again, her intrigue, I would say, probably already started all the way in episode 1 in the pilot. I mean, the fact that she joined the lunch table with Mark and Rev, I think situates that there is some level of curiosity. Curiosity becomes intrigue, and intrigue, of course, later on becomes a state of loyalty. And so because of that, there is, again, the situated resolve that she has here too, which is essentially that, it doesn't really matter, right? But Rev does not work that way, right? Rev is all about action, process, do things that need to be done, which is what Sera is not doing here too. I forgot that's actually the scene I we're about to see with Mark and his family, so let's continue.
Whatever. Let's see, it's just... Here's my dorm room. That means... Aha! Now, you need to grab my bag over there, and...
It's right over here! I have so much stuff to show you!
Of course you show up now, you useless vampire!
Uh-oh.
Just hurry up and hide! Yeah, that works.
Big door to Minecraft.
This is my room. It's pretty cool, right? I guess my roommate isn't here right now, but trust me, Dad would have thought he was so cool.
Almost certainly, Master Mark. I will make a note for him. Cool roommate. Is that all? It's getting quite late, and I still need to check on at least 20 more children.
Wait, don't go yet! You haven't even seen my cape collection! Look! This one's from the second cousin of my dad's brother's half-sibling!
Why, yes, Master Mark. Most impressive. I shall make a note for your father to review later.
And over here! See this goblet? Dad drank from it once. That's gotta bump me up a bit, right?
That makes you one of the 54 other children with one of the Count's many goblets in their possession. This one is in mediocre condition. I shall make a note.
Oh, okay. What about this over here?
Knowing him, this is gonna take all day. I need to get him out of here before Sera suffocates.
She would even be able to suffocate, honestly, but I mean, who really knows, right? Sarah's whole power level is quite not even inconsistent. It's just we don't know that much about what she can actually do because she puts in pretty much a low amount of effort when it comes to anything in general. But she can definitely beat Rev's freaking butt all the time. But again, it is, this entire situation really solidifies a lot of Mark's living standards. And especially his familiar connection, right? So, of course, there definitely seems like there is a lack of attentiveness in, of course, his father's perception. Now, we don't know, we don't know what Count Dracula is really doing necessarily in this world, right? Because we're going to learn about, of course, Sarah's parent as well, or more so her father. Again, could be a god or whatever the case is. But again, like when we see here, when it comes into Mark's entire standard, is that it is interesting because I would say that we don't really come back to this entire situation besides a little bit of episode 7 when it comes into just Mark talking about how he feels like Rev hates him or that Rev's been ignoring him or whatever the case is. And that's why I said before that, like, I think, and again, I haven't seen episode 8 yet, of course, so when we get to there, maybe my opinion will change about it. But that's why I said that I think this series definitely deserves to be like Greenland. I don't know the process for these YouTube series, but definitely it should deserve to at least continue the story because I think there's a lot to be told with Mark's entire character as well. And who knows, right? If it does continue off into another season 2, then I'll still be here to analyze the characters and all that stuff. But again, when it comes into Mark's situation here, there obviously is a lack of attentiveness, a lack of, in a sense, a proper care for a lot of these things, right? And that's something we see a lot in real life with families that have like 6, 7, 8 siblings within the actual household, right? Is that there again because there's so much to be attentive towards, right? You tend to start to divulge less attention, less connection towards the other sibling, right? The other not sibling, the other child. And so because of that, parents tend to, of course, not be able to connect to all of them, right? Same thing. You'll see the same thing in like classrooms in the academic environment too, where teachers can't necessarily give each person the equal amount of attention. If you'll go into like universities where there's like 140 students per classroom, again, like it's easier to just present things in an equal standard than anything else, right? And we don't know. Maybe there is another child of the Dracula bloodline that gets more attention than Mark does, right? But you can definitely say that there is an almost competitive nature to it all, right? That he'll grab whatever he can to convince the butler to tell his father that, like, oh, I've done this for you. I've kept this thing that reminds me of you, whatever the case is, right? We clearly see here that there is no sentimentality towards the objects. It is just a process of like, I have this. Does that make me better than the other siblings? So like that, I can have more attention with, I can gain more attention from my father, right? Which again does, of course, create a sense of codependency, right? Right. With Mark, he'll take whatever level of connection he can get, whether it's with a friend or with, of course, later on as we see with Nerissa, right? A level of companionship, a level of connection, right? Probably matter being like, as we're going to see, of course, in episode 7, there clearly is a romantic gravitation that he has toward Nerissa, but again, it's all in the sense of codependency that he has towards Rev. Now, as we're going to see later on in the series, Sera may develop that same standard, but for a different reason entirely, right? But here we can just mark this down as Mark's codependency comes from a lack of attentiveness from his father, right? And from his familiar connection, which seems to kind of not really be there. Of course, the butler herself, you can't really blame her, right? She's a butler and she has to deal with apparently like freaking 20, 50 students, right? Yeah, you're going to be more stressed out, more like tired for being like one place for too long, right? And it's also a question of, I don't know if those other siblings are in Cade. That's why I said before that it would be interesting if they are, to have like a sort of connection with that. But again, we'll talk about that later on when we're done with this entire reaction part of the series as well. So we'll get into that later on. But for now, just keep in mind that this is a pretty important note for Mark's character too.
What the? I almost forgot! Cats can see past reality! You can see me, don't you, Raven? Perfect. Do me a favor, go run down the hall and make Mark chase after you for a few minutes. Okay. Cat, go run down hall.
It's like the opposite because he calls
Are you
Raven
dense or
cat instead
something?
of Raven.
I need you to make a distraction! What?
Raven, no! Ah, my best friend's cat is dead! Again!
I'll make a note for your father. Irresponsible with pets.
I gotta make sure that amulet revived her!
Oh, you stupid cat. Finally. Sera, out.
It was cramped.
Hurry up and grab the bag.
What's taking so long?
I think that's actually one of the first times that she's actually complained about something, which is pretty interesting.
Is this it? Bones, candles, and some chalk.
No salt?
Nope.
Just get some from the kitchen, zombie boy. Salt is salt.
No, Wendigo! It has to be special iodized ritual salt! Kind they have in undead class.
We need special salt.
Knock it off!
This is an example of
This should be it.
verbal
Open it up. Perfect. Now we just need to go grab the salt.
This is a closed exam. Stay out.
Oh, my bad.
What? No, Sera!
Once again, obedience is false.
Focus, Miss O'Terry. You will finish this autopsy. We aren't leaving until you learn how to extract a heart.
But I'm hungry.
I don't care if it takes all night. Keep going.
God damn it! The eclipse is in less than an hour. We're gonna miss it at this rate. Ah, stupid zombie.
You're just as stupid. You couldn't do this test either. You're a zombie too.
Are you kidding? I've never failed a test in my entire life because I'm not a zombie! I'm not a zombie. That's it. Watch it, Wendigo. I'm gonna ace this test for her with the help of a simple spell. All right.
But yeah, you know the scene. He helps Sam Motory complete the test. You know all the same.
Ready? Sera, get some salt.
Okay.
The second time, yeah, or first time they possess her, second time occurs within episode number 6 with the Belladonna episode, as I call it. But yeah, like it's all about just essentially his connection with, again, the undead, and we already saw that before when it comes into his characterization here. That when it comes into his aspect about his vice, the vice of death, that he is a lot more in control over what he can do. But he definitely has a strong sense of pride over the sense of the undead, which makes sense since, you know, he can control them. You know, he would of course feel like he's of course in a higher authority over most of the undead in the, you know, I assume just in the world in general, right, as a necromancer. But as we see here with Sera, again, you know, she doesn't do much without people really asking her. That's why I said that she is really obedient to a fault, because the thing about Sera is that, like, there is a sense of overly obedient nature to herself. Because, again, she always takes the path of least resistance. Which, as we're going to see, that point of her personality type also does fit into what makes her so connected with Rev, which is going to lead into what I said before, which is that she also has a sense of over-reliance on Rev as a person. But I think we only get that necessarily towards episode, I want to say episode number 6 and number 7. Because in both those episodes, we see that it kind of questions what she does without really Rev telling her what to do, or really trying to help or commit to a task in general. She's really task-oriented, as we said before. But that also leads her which is connected to what we say above here as well, or not really that one, I guess technically would be the second one above it, which is the overly obedient nature allows her to accomplish a task, but that also leads her to switching between tasks whenever it's asked of her to do. So somebody else has to do something else, she will most likely take that entire command and go along with it because, again, it's easier than to say no. It's easier than to try to fight it the way that Rev constantly does himself.
Okay.
What the? Did you just make that?
Yes. Did you want some more?
You could have done that. The whole time.
Yes.
She says it with such certainty.
Forget it. We need to get to the roof before I have a conniption. Open! Okay, the way up to the roof should be right around here somewhere. And,
Take care, Miss Belladonna. Ah, Miss Seraphim. I've been meaning to speak with you. Do you have a minute?
Sure.
But no! We only have a few minutes until we need to do the ritual!
I think I'm busy.
I just need a moment of
I
your
love
time.
how, like, Wendy's just looking between the two of
Please,
them.
come in.
Okay.
What? No, Sera, don't! God, I've had it with this angel!
Now what? Hurry up and figure something out!
Okay, we need someone to help us set it up, so... Come on.
I swear everyone in this school is stupid. Just go to the principal's office and use her mirror, and quit bothering me.
And that part of the, we're going to come back to, of course, later on with episode number 6 itself, when it comes into Belladonna's kind of connection with other people. And again, she doesn't really show up that much. You are going to see her in episode 4, though, so yay! But again, a lot of what happens here is a state of just disconnection from people. Again, not really too surprising from what we looked at Belladonna's character all the way back in the pilot episode. And so, what ends up happening here is essentially a sense of adoration and a sense of understanding of how everything works in tandem with one another. In terms of the character dynamics that we see between Belladonna and other people here too. But here we're going to see that when it comes into Sera's character, there is a lot more to it than just her being the quirky, non-speaking, or not really non-speaking, but really monotonistic and monopitch individual that we essentially see of her as well.
What? There's an exit in the principal's office? Thanks for nothing, zombie boy.
I'm not a zombie! And screw that mirror! My ritual...
And that's also the thing as well, as well.
Will work just fine. I don't need that principal to know what I'm up to.
Right. But again, multiple things to say here, right? First and foremost, Wendy, of course, that is the question, right? Does she also take the path of least resistance the same way Sera does? In a sense, you could argue it, as long as it leads to her survival. Sera just takes the path of least resistance because she's bored with everything and she'd rather not put in the extra work for something that does not matter to her as much. Typically see that within depressive episodes of people in the real world. However, when it comes into Wendy, a large part of it is also the fact that she will take whatever survivability she can actually have, because again, it helps her get to whatever goal that she's trying to achieve. And so again, if it works for her, then she'll take whatever she can have, honestly. She doesn't really care, right? Whether you're following Rev, you're following Sera, or she's just going to do whatever is really pronounced, or whatever is really told to be a solution to her predicament. So for her, it's all about what can I do to escape the situation that I do not like at all. But of course, with Rev here, again, the initial statement makes it seem like he's just going back to his initial pride, which is that, I know my thing works better than whatever you can find up there, right? But no, there also is reasoning behind it. I don't want the principal to know where I am, especially if she knows everything like she says she does. I would rather not risk that at the same time, right? So that's essentially what Rev is trying to achieve here, a state of independence, disconnected from whatever Viviana wants or is trying to do to him at the same time.
I don't trust her.
Yeah, well, good luck with that. I'm out of here, loser.
Whatever, I didn't need you anyway! I do need Sera, though. So what's taking her so long?
He has enough.
Close the
really
door.
that he doesn't.
Whatever, I'll just force my way in. What the?
And nothing has changed at all? Even now?
Not really, no.
Miss Vim, out of all of the students of your class, you've been here the longest. And you've undergone the least change, despite your tenure here at Cade. I've tried countless approaches and pushed you toward countless activities, and yet none of them hold your interest.
No.
And that line comes back holding someone's interest. That comes back to when she
visitors
explains
today.
that to Rev about
Does
what
this
speaking
not upset you at
do
all?
to her.
Should it? My father is a busy man.
Again, a disconnection from other people and their roles, right? Like, why would I bother my father, right? He has his own thing going on. You know, there's no point in asking for help from other people, right? This is something that doesn't even bother me, right? And that's the thing, right? That especially with Kate, as we said, that, you know, it has its own kind of mirrored version of our real world quality. Ironic enough that it'll, you know, the human world does exist in this world, obviously, but again, it is an interesting case because in society, typically, whenever we ask for help, it's not really looked down as much as it was back in, like, I would say the 1980s or 90s or so. You know, pretty close as to where the APA, the American Psychological Association, was founded too. But again, like, it's all about this entire identity of, like, you know, is there really a need for it, right? Because within our world, if a person is fine or they don't need help, then more often than not, there's really no point in doing that, right? Now, of course, people who go through depressive episodes and moments of mental breaks and stuff like that, right? Sometimes they'll disguise it underneath this mask of, like, you know, I'll be fine. Now, that is to not be confused with antisocial personality disorder, which is a different situation entirely. But people within depressive episodes tend to kind of create a masking effect and pretend like, oh, everything is fine, right? Now, of course, is that something that Sera herself is doing? I wouldn't necessarily say so, because again, this is an atypical, normal situation, right? With Sera, she is a immortal angel, you know, woman creature that, again, that does not really see the world through the ways that the average mortal or person does, right? Now, Rev himself is also technically immortal, similar to her, or at the very least, you know, she lives for a very long time. So for her, it's like, you know, if a person does not want another person to be sad or to be in helplessness the way that Lovecraft doesn't want his students to feel those negative traits, if that's the case and I feel fine, right, and I'm not like, you know, I'm not affected by the negative circumstance that you'll see, like, oh, my dad is not here, right, to greet me, right, that, like, all these things haven't worked for me, but I'm not complaining, right? She's not like Rev or like whatever other student is there and will complain about the situation, which we know that all the other students here kind of feel fine, right? Mark uses this as an opportunity to create an anchor of social communication, social commitment for himself, so like that he doesn't feel like he's just left alone, right? With Bella, it's a similar thing. She has a community of people who are just as weird as she is, right? So there is no more need to fear being like the odd one out when she's in a place where everyone is the same thing as her, right? And with Sera, there's the one exception, right? She is somebody who just does not really care, right? She didn't care back when she was committing her duty here. We'll let this play in then, like, mute thing, but she wasn't committing to her duty here, and you know, because of that, because she's not in the same position as everyone else, there is no need to feel as distressed, to feel as angry about this entire situation, because again, her emotional standard is completely gone, right? Typically, when we'll have a neurological effect or defect in our brain system within our amygdala, which regulates our sense of self-preservation and our sense of care and emotional standards, there is a dampening effect on what makes us afraid, what makes us concerned for our own safety, our own mental scape at the same time. And because of that, there isn't really a state that really matters to us as much as anything else could, right? Because we are put into a situation like Sera's, where that boredom, that monotony, it's become part of our situation. We have been conditioned through classic conditioning to accept that this is exactly the way that the world works. There is a sociological concept called, sociological commonality, which is that when we see something in society again and again, like in real life, when we see shootings happen, when we see people getting hurt in the world, right, it doesn't take away from the negative standards that exist. And Sera knows, like, negative and positive reactions. She knows when Rev is angry and when he's not. right? She understands those emotional values in the same way that Belle would understand a spell by reading from a textbook, right? She knows that they are there, but there is a lack of connection. And as we saw here in Anhedonia, right, it is a more psychological perspective where you can no longer feel pleasure from those activities that you once wanted, right? And so there's a loss of interest towards anything else that essentially happens there because of the fact that there's no need to necessarily enjoy these things if it does not cause you distress, right? And so because of that, there is a scenario like this where you kind of understand why it is that she feels that way, right? Because no matter how much Lovecraft tries to put in the effort, tries to create a bridge between that worker and that customer mentality, Sera does not care, right? That analogy was used because as a worker, we're typically, supposed to help out those around us.
Sorry.
Whatever. We're almost out of time.
And again, there is that kind of slight hesitation from Rev, like, are you okay? Like, what the hell? Right? But again, like, he hides it behind his progression because he needs to complete this task, and similar to Sera, who is task obedient, right? It is that kind of, again, customer and worker mentality, right? However, of course, in this case, it is, in a sense, her working for Rev's standards, right? Whatever he wants to do, whatever he wants to accomplish, she's willing to do so because, again, that's just the way she works. That's the way she handles her situation. And so, again, like, there is a sense of purpose and a sense of duty that she's essentially given to herself, right? For all intents and purposes there as well. And so, again, like, it's an incredibly situated resolve that she carries within herself, too. But again, like, is Sera someone who's going through a depressive episode or stuff like that? I don't think so, but I definitely think that there is a kind of monotony and, like, apathetic nature to a lot of what she essentially does in general. I think it's just because her perception of the world is so different, right? Like, if you were to look at it from, like, a human perspective or even just from our own world, you can add that kind of egocentric mentality that's like, oh, well, what does that even matter, right? Well, what happens in this entire situation when you are in a position to kind of not really be as, what's the word? Be as concerned over any kind of mental drawbacks that this will lead to, right? But I don't know, I just think it's a really important situation to really find ourselves within.
So follow me and let's get me out of here already!
Okay.
Place that candle right there. Perfect. Now, everything's in place.
I couldn't find that mirror that witch girl mentioned. Guess I gotta use your ritual.
Really? Now you want to cooperate?
What? Can't a girl just want to get out of the void too?
Whatever, I don't have time for this. Just let me focus. Alright. Corpora caelestia audite, muros realitatis frangitis. It's working! I got just a little longer and...
Oops!
What? Wendy, no! What the... Sera, you're...
This is unfortunate.
This worked out better than I thought. I got your little friend in here too.
You idiot! You ruined our way out!
No, I ruined your way out. I'm gonna go use the principal's mirror, then break it. Behind me. It was nice knowing you, zombie boy.
Wait! Ah! You're gonna pay for this, you hag!
And there it comes this entire situation, right? Of course, well, I said before, of course, that Wendy isn't necessarily the traditional bully in the way that we would typically imagine it to be. This is, of course, a fairly jerkish thing to do. So, again, here is one of those situations where you're definitely siding with Rev, right? Again, we're seeing through his perspective. We are seeing the work and the irritation that he puts into everything that he essentially does. And so what ends up happening is that when Wendy commits this entire act of, like, petty vengeance, there is that kind of understanding, like, oh yeah, that's just a really nasty thing to do, right? We understand Rev is annoyed at her for an obvious reason, right? That she does these bad things for the sake of just them existing, right? There is no real proper excusable reasoning behind anything at all, right? And again, there is this entire like perspective on how this entire situation really works. And again, like, I don't know, it's a really, really strange dynamic to really look at, because you're just looking at two people who are just upset at their given circumstances, that they are upset at the people, not helping their circumstances, right? Of course, Wendy towards Rev and Rev towards pretty much everyone. That, again, you kind of gain this entire sense of like sympathy for him, right? And for Wendy to a certain degree as well, because it's like, you see that both these situations are happening simultaneously, right? So it creates a sense of like understanding that, like, oh yeah, this is all really unfair. This is all a uncertain circumstance that, of course, Wendy has put them within, but definitely an unfortunate circumstance that, she herself has pretty much felt ever since Rev came into the school, right? Which she mentioned in episode 5 as well, right? It's a very strange and very like emotionally sound scenario to really find herself in. Absolutely. And this scene is, of course, definitely one that I talked about, but we can definitely look at it again.
Whoa.
Are you kidding me? You're seriously not mad right now?
Should I be?
Yes! Yes, you should!
Why?
Because you hate this school. You skip class all the time and you don't want to be here, but you do nothing about it! Even now, that Wendigo sealed you in the void for eternity, and you still don't care! What is wrong with you?
And as we said, right, that what is wrong with her is that because of her scenario, because of her perception, there's never been anything to care about, right? Time is just limited. Death is just inevitable, right? There's nothing to really worry about. Why stress about this entire situation when nothing really matters? That's the thing. If she is immortal and she truly can live forever, then that makes it even more monotonous. Why would it even matter when it won't even affect me? And it always happens to people all around me for hundreds of years. So why would I care about that at all, right? And again, like, it's like, she has the same kind of model that we talked about before with anhedonia, right? It occurs within the standard of just not being able to really care, right? It's not being able to care about all these things, because why would you, right? Your perception is so disconnected, so different, that's like, what does it even matter, right? She's like, oh yeah, well, this is unfortunate. Yeah, it's in a basic standard, in a conceptual basic understanding of the given scenario that she's currently within in the present moment in time, it is an unfortunate situation, right? But there's nothing she can do about it, so why even try, right? She's just helping Rev in the beginning because he asked her to. She appeared there maybe because she does have that interest and curiosity as to what is happening. But again, even then, she's helping him because, again, he asked her to, right? There's no sense of independence in her action, right? But again, like, it is all about that entire standard of, like, at what point do you commit that action, right? Rev is obviously the opposite, as we mentioned in the Sera analysis video, that he works within active rage, right? And so because of that, it is all about that entire given standard.
If I were you, and my dad didn't show up, everyone forced me to stay at a school I didn't want to be at, and I got tormented by the students here, I'd do more than get a little mad. I'd rage! I'd do anything to get out! Or at least fight until I get my way. I wouldn't sit there and take it! I'll never understand how you can just let them do this to you. Because I wouldn't.
And so, as we mentioned before, one of the major aspects that we're seeing here take place is something called third-party anger, right? Which is essentially that, it's essentially the simplest explanation is that it occurs whenever we feel angry for a person, right? So that's what happens within fictional characters, where they're put under an unfortunate circumstance. We feel mad for them, right? We're like, how can like this character be put into the circumstance when they're such a nice person, or that they put in this hard work and the universe isn't being fair to them, right? We become angry for other people, right? And the fact that he's able to do that for Sera here shows that he does have empathy, right? Now, of course, in the very next episode, we see that he doesn't in a broad sense, but there is empathy here for Sera, right? Someone can only feel third-party anger towards another person when it occurs in this whole scenario where that unfairness boils up into a situation like this, right? Where it's like, how can you really stand there, right? But again, he's not necessarily even just mad at the people who did this to her, right? Which again, you would normally be mad at the external forces, the people, the situation outside of the control of either the individual and the one that they are getting mad for. And he's not just getting mad at that, because he's already mad at the institution. He's mad at Viviana, he's mad at Wendy, he's mad at all these external factors. But here, it's Sera's own fault from his perspective, right? She is letting this happen, right? If a person fights to get their way, as we see with a lot of characters in fiction, we're talking the Spider-Man, we're talking the Steven Universes of the world, right? We're talking people who try to get their, who try to do things in their own manner and are being pushed back. That hard work allows us to feel angry for them, right? And so here, is this still third-party anger? Is this still third-party anger towards the situation that person was in? Yes, right? It still is, but I would argue it's an intrapersonal variation of it, right? Interpersonal is essentially just between the people that are causing it, right? Bullies towards the underdog, nerdy kid, if you will. That is just another Spider-Man thing, but it is part of that social dynamic, right? But intrapersonal is that I'm getting mad because your life is unfair and you're not doing anything about it. So I'm also mad at you, right? Because this could be so much easier if you just stood up for yourself, right? Get mad, get angry at the world around you because you deserve to get angry, right? And this is one of the first times that he actually provides a level of advice that is actually there. And as we're going to see later on, he is also humble about his own standard of moral advice that he can give and moral strength that he can offer another person. Because again, that's exactly what he does, right? That's exactly what he places into that position, because that's what that's essentially his main given standard, right? It doesn't really matter as much because, why would it? Why would it matter? It doesn't, And again, nobody ever really cares, right? Lovecraft will still keep being patient for as long as it takes for everyone else. And I don't know if he actually has been there as long as she has, because I think that he is still mortal to a certain extent. But if he has been there since the beginning, then that showcases that he is a incredible teacher. And he holds an incredible amount of patience, too, just to be there with Sera, someone who just does not engage with or do anything for that matter, right? And, and again, there is that unfairness to the people that did die under her care. Just because she doesn't see the world in that perspective doesn't mean it's the only perspective, right? She definitely has a weaker sense of egocentrism, but there definitely is a kind of more blunt nature that she has for a lot of her characterization, essentially.
Do you have anything to say?
No.
Forget it. I'm getting out of here. You could sit around and do nothing until the stars burn out for all I care. All right. Where the hell is the principal's office again? I need to beat that Wendigo there.
Is this where you wanted the mirror moved, Headmaster Kincaid?
Wait, they moved the mirror? Oh, maybe I can beat Wendy to it! Where is it? Is this it? It looks different from the one in the attic.
Oh, you make it so easy, zombie boy.
What the?
Nice try, but I win this time.
Wait. Back here again.
And again, this is another reasoning of her being
This I don't have a way out.
Situation.
Thanks, Mom and Dad. Really having a great time here.
And again, there is that sense of betrayal that he feels, especially towards his parents, because, let's be honest here, right? His parents are not the best in terms of, the communication they have with their son, right? Morally and fundamentally at a familiar level, sure, they are really great, they are really nice and wholesome and whatever the case is, and they support and believe his talent, his skill set, because again, they themselves have that same skill set. But again, there is this sense of a lack of communication, which again goes against his whole entire perception of like agency, right? It doesn't really matter to them because, for them, his sense of agency doesn't really change, right? He has his own sense of independence, right? And while he is, of course, someone who is really intelligent in terms of his own kind of magical potential, again, there's no sense of like connection that's really had there, which we are going to see at the end of this after he gets out with Sera. But again, like there is no real alternative to that, right? And in a sense, he's almost accepting of it, willing to make a deal with his void creature. That we're kind of going to skip over the scene because it's a fairly long scene, but again, like it's all about just the connection that it's had. It's a really small. I think his voice really slow. It's all good. And when we do get to episode number 6 with Belladonna, when we do see this void creature again, I do want to make a comparison and contrast between him and Lovecraft, which again, I already said spoilers many times now, so at this point, like if you're here, I'm assuming you don't really care about spoilers, but as we find out that Lovecraft is his son. But again, just to see how they deal with the students and giving them the strength to carry on, and it's different, right? One is through hard work, one is, of course, is not through hard work. But again, we'll get more into it in episode 6 as well. But again, it is incredibly important to see all of these things here and to see just how fundamental it is to like the characterization that we have of those around us, honestly.
Don't.
Sera?
And of course, she takes the act.
Don't listen to it.
Why are you here?
You were right.
What?
I've been at this school longer than anyone, and never has someone held my interest.
You can kind of tell that from her voice. There also is that kind of tiredness, right? We mentioned before that she has monopitch, but what happens is that, and typically monopitch happens either through selective mutism, right? It happens through a state of just, not putting as much effort, right? People who are, of course, a lot more disengaged from social activities, right, tend to have a lower, slower kind of way of speaking. But what happens here is that, like, you kind of see that there is a tiredness in a lot of how she explains things, a lot of what she essentially does. And that becomes her main voice. And I think that's more realistic than her suddenly, after this episode, becoming a lot more, talking normally and stuff, which we know happens all the time. So the next episode, she uses that, exclamation voice that we're going to see at the end of this episode too. But again, like, it makes sense for her to keep this voice because, again, through classic conditioning, this is how she's pretty much learned to speak for most of her life. Whether or not she's actually spoken differently in the past or not, we don't really know, right? Maybe in the past she was, at a younger age, she was a lot more hyperactive or a lot more engaged with the duties of an angel and stuff like that. But, over time, that kind of thing starts to become a lot more, that behavior starts to become a lot more lessened as we start to live longer and longer lives and stuff like that. And there is that kind of danger of living a long life too, is that you start to kind of lose the interest in the smaller of things in, our everyday environments, and that is an important thing to really recognize and to realize in general. But yeah, let's see here.
Until you.
Me?
I want to let the scene play out
I've
because
never
I do
met a
have the
student
listening.
like
Probably
you.
saw my notepad there that I do
Your
want to
rage
connect.
against everything. It's the first thing to catch my interest.
Yeah, there's a timeline of events that she essentially.
I found myself wanting to watch you. To see how you behave. The school is inescapable, and yet you fight it like no other. I think I want to learn that rage. I want to learn it from you.
I'm not a teacher you want.
Allow this to be my first act of defiance, then. You don't have a choice.
Great.
I could give you release.
Rev Vennet doesn't need you.
And that's super sweet for multiple reasons, of course, right? Of course, there was an initial question, is she minimizing his existence by just stating that, like, she's just observing him and stuff like that and seeing how he acts and stuff, right? Again, is that too different from the way that Viviana does it? Well, of course it is different in the practical level of things, right? Viviana just watches him and, knows everything about him in general, right? Again, there's no point in doing any of that, right? But again, like, it is important, right? definitely is an important standard to really reach at the same time, in terms of just how those situations really occur at the same moment, right? But what ends up happening is that you create this circumstance where it's like you're willing to accept that change, right? And that's the thing, is that she's not going to change her entire personality. That's not really what she promised. What she promised is that she wants to learn how to act more like him. Because not only is that more in terms of how a mortal itself acts, right? But it's also a way to live a more active life, something that doesn't let you just stay in boredom forever. But these conversations hit on 4 main points, right? First and foremost, it is what we call Rev's active rage. As we said before, when it comes into Rev's rage, it is simply the fact that there is a constant force of action against injustice and a greater sense of independence. Now, as we said before, the thing with Sera is that even if something is unfair to her, there isn't necessarily a position that she wants to take to actually command action towards it. Because if she doesn't care, so then why does it matter, right? That's what we said before, is her main kind of perception of the world itself. When it comes into the recognition of value, right, it's essentially that there is value in negative forces like anger/rage, and in value in mortality. The projection of need. What does she need? Well, there is a need for action, mobility, and cognitive stimulation. Sera is in the need for some format of change from her usual routine. The monotony is fine by her. She doesn't really care much for it. But as you can clearly see, there is this level of boredom towards everything, right? Why does anything even matter at the same time? If Rev were to just die immediately out of nowhere, right, she wouldn't really put much thought into it. Now, at the end of the series, there is, of course, a different reaction to that, right? I think she would be a lot more distraught towards it. But again, like, there is a situation where it's all about helping others at the same time. Now, of course, learning as a solution is a simple fact, right? There is a want to learn from Rev, rage, learn pushback, learn persistence. Because Rev has a lot of persistence towards his actions, toward everything for this matter, right? But because of these 4 main values, right? These are what I would say is Sera's 4 main values. And I think that is essentially the best way to really describe a lot of what she really feels about the world, is that it's an easier way to essentially believe in these entire sentimentalities as well, right? Because again, why wouldn't it be, right? She follows these 4 values pretty much constantly, right? But whenever we're looking through the series, I'm going to definitely mark this down in our little notepad here, because it is so important to remember that these are the 4 main things that she essentially follows constantly, right? And so when that occurs, right, we know that these are entirely why it is that she acts so fundamentally upset whenever those values are not really met, right? So anytime she gets mad in the series or questions Rev or wants to do something and Rev says something, of the opposite ordeal, we'll look back at these 4 main values. So we'll look back at them in episode 4 when she argues with them, in episode 5 throughout most of their interactions, and then later on in episode 7 when she's trying to get him to help Mark out with the Narissa problem. Because those 4 main values are heavily important in the way that she essentially acts and behaves as a person, right? And so that is essentially what we gain from that scene, right? Is that those are the 4 main values she now wants to follow, right? And she actually takes, of course, that level of independence, right? She does not give Rev a choice as to whether or not he wants to help her. She's like, no, you are going to help me because that is essentially what I am telling you to do, right? Now, again, that analogy of customer and worker, is that still being met? Absolutely. Absolutely, that's still being met. In fact, the matter being that Sera is still technically the worker for the customer, right? But in a sense, again, can you argue that it is also the opposite? Well, again, here you make that entire point clear as well, right? In the opposite perspective, that's still actually true. Well, I would say probably is, right? if Rev is the worker, he's putting in the work of his own wants, right? His own wants and his own needs. Sera then becomes just a customer, right? She is buying into that, right? She wants to see him rage out because then she can learn. So like that, as we can see at the end here, she can also project that back out, right? Gaining a sense of self-control. She's not going to become a jerk. She's not going to become a pain in the butt, the way that he explains about Rev in the next episode, that all he knows is really just anger and rage, and those are his two main emotions, which again, she's fine with. That's what she wants to see. She wants to learn from that, but it's also fairly limited of an emotional spectrum. Now, of course, in real life, you do not just want to have a certain emotional spectrum, right? If you limit yourself too much, you become monotonous, you become similar to Sera. Nothing wrong with that necessarily in terms of her character, but there is that kind of limitation that does not create a sense of communication that you can have with other people. Now, of course, in the opposite side of things, you become too emotional, then you get sensitive over everything, and you become overly dependent on an anchor to lower you down from your entire situation, which is something that we do not see Mark try to do. He just wants to create a codependent partner in a general level, of course, instead of just holding himself back from being overly emotional as well. So again, very, very important, right? I definitely think that once we get to the meltdown episode, this is going to become a lot more higher, and this has probably become the lowest amount because, as we said, or as I said, Mark is not necessarily that much of a, let's say, overly developed or complex character, you know? There's some complexity, but yeah, it is.
Oh, are we in the principal's office?
What the hell? You got into the void? Stupid angel.
You're in the way.
You better back off, Wendigo. I'm Rescue Guard Dog.
It is funny that you can kind of hear Sarah's actual, like, what her normal tone would be like just from Wendy's character as well. You can tell it's just a lot more like the typical teenage girl voice, obviously, but it's just a fun little kind of, not really Easter egg, but it's a fun little hint at like what her voice actually is like.
Stop that.
Stop it! You're embarrassing me.
Enough.
I've had enough. Leave me alone.
And that is the case. Why is she being such a jerk towards Sera too? Right? We know that from anybody who's not Mark, she typically is just pretty much avoidant of them or makes slide remarks, but there's nothing overly interactive and direct with other people. So why is that happening now? Well, it's for a simple fact, right? She knows now that Sera and Rev are working together. That Sera helped Rev, and Sera's like, as Wendy says, right? Sera's just Rev's guard dog. So again, like that creates a sense of like, oh, if you're with him, that means that you're just as bad, right? So now I'm going to bully you as well because you're with a person who's making my life a literal hell, right? And so I react back, and now you help him at the same time. So again, like, and we're gonna see, like, of course, the parallel to what happened in Pilot with her getting blasted out of the window, Team Rocket style. But again, like, because of that entire situation, there is a clear sense of like understanding that yeah, she is not necessarily making herself out to be that much of a good person, right? Not necessarily she's making herself an enemy, but it is to say that she is being someone who just does not care about Rev to a large amount, right? Rev is not special in her eyes, as we said before in her notes. When it comes into Wendy's entire case, yeah, Rev is not at all someone who really matters that much to her because of that entire idea, right? That's less than valuable to the greater social area. And so because of that, if anybody says differently, then she'll get mad at them too, you know? So we'll add like a slight comment here as well, but it is to say that anyone who believes or helps Rev is seen as just. I swear to God, though, if Wendy ends up getting like the necromancy or whatever, the Necronomicon, and ends up turning super powerful just to beat Rev up, that would be the most hilarious thing ever. But you know, I do still think Wendy at the end will at least get redeemed because there is truth to what she says a lot of the time, and I think just if she doesn't get redeemed, I think that would just be a pretty big missed opportunity for her as a character, honestly.
Rev?
Huh?
I think I get it now. of hearing you yap all day. I've spent hundreds of years in this mortal plane, and I've never heard anyone run their worthless tongue more than you. And I dare you to mock me one more time!
I'm so mad.
Nice one.
And again, like there is that exhaustion, right? Because again, when you try to act in a way you haven't before, there is that kind of mental toll to it all, right? Again, we see that a lot with introverts, with a low social battery. I know that, but you'll have introverts with low social batteries. You'll have, as we said before, right, people with depression masking this entire like happy personality, right? Again, there is that mental exhaustion and mental anchoring down into a level of weakness, essentially. Not weakness as in like you're weak for doing it, but weakness as in like, there is that mental fatigue that occurs after the fact. But again, it is like bravo for her for actually standing up for once, especially for herself. I don't even know what the hell happened to Wendy, honestly, right? Maybe something really bad happened, maybe not, right? We don't really know. And we do know in episode 5 that there is that kind of perspective of like what is that reaction to what happened to her, honestly, It is a really, really interesting perspective to really find out. But she speaks up against herself, and that's a really good thing, right? She's learned that kind of rage once again. Right? And you could argue, is there really because she said, she spent all these years in the mortal plane. Of course, she's from a more heavenly plane, we can assume. It is that whole thing about being surrounded by such niceties showcase that, it doesn't really matter, right? And that there is more of a sensitivity towards, bullies or somebody who just does negative things for no reason, right? I think necessity and contextualization are important aspects when analyzing people like Wendy and like Rev, right? When they do something that is unnecessary, that creates a lower karmatic kind of, moral system for them, right? But again, it's all about just the situation that we really find ourselves within at the same time. And so because of that, it leads into a situation that's entirely there as well,
She was annoying.
Yeah, she was. The nightmare's finally over. Now I can...
I hope our discussion has been enlightening. Oh, speak of the devil.
Rev!
Sweetheart!
Mom? Dad? What are you...
Oh, we got mixed up and lost track of time. We ended up running a little late, and then we couldn't find you.
But your wonderful principal told us all about you. Oh, and we're just so happy.
What did you talk about?
By the way, Sport, we noticed you summoned Raven. You were getting lonely, weren't you?
No.
That's okay, sweetie. Your father and I decided Raven can stay with you during school, since we don't want to leave you on your own.
Wait, don't.
Well, you two will have a chance to see Mr. Bennett again later in the semester. For now, I believe you mentioned getting back to work?
Oh, yes. We have to go, sweetie. But don't be a stranger.
Call us sometime or write a letter. We love you.
Stop!
Again, they're not the worst parents ever, but they certainly do not communicate a single thing to Rev at all. Right? And again, that's part of his characterization, and that's part of his journey, that if you're put into a world where your agency is being questioned and your agency is being taken away, how do you respond, right? You stay compliant, like Sera does, or do you act out, right? And again, it is a really, really important role to really have as a person. And that kind of question of what do I want for my existence, right? What do I want from what I'm doing at the same time, right? So again, it's a very, very interesting connection we have.
You see, Mr. Bennett, I know everything that goes on in my school, and I have accounted for everything. As you can see, you have no chance of leaving. So this game we're playing, you will lose.
And she could have said multiple stuff, right? In episode 5, we're going to see, she tells him, like, this kind of game that we're doing, right? You have to stop, right? You have to start behaving. Versus here, she just immediately, once again, tries to double down on that lack of agency that he has by saying, like, you're going to lose. It is inevitable that no matter what you're going to do, I'll counter everything else, right? So, just stop already and be compliant, right? Which, again, ironic enough, because Sera is, technically speaking, one of the most compliant people. I say, of course, Mark still has a bump ahead of her because of the fact that Sera does still skip the classes and stuff. But, again, like, she still is really obedient to whatever social rules and regulations are placed around her, right? But again, like, it is a really, really important and really telling aspect that she is someone who will try her best to just, live her own life the way she wants to.
I will never let you win. Sera?
Okay.
And that is the end of episode numero tres. But again, like, it is such a really, really amazing one, right? Sera is definitely, as you all know, one of my favorites, if not my favorite character probably in the entire series, next to Wendy. I know, ironic enough, right? Ironic enough, the girl that went flying out of the window and the boy is one of my favorites. But I just think that there's just something really fascinating about what they're doing with her, right? And it could just lead to nothing. It could just lead to her being like the main villain and then, or not really the main villain, because I'm quite sure that is the boy creature, but it could just lead to her just being completely destroyed and then punished and whatever the case is, right? Not killed. I don't think they would do that, but like they're definitely like, it definitely seems like either she's going to be the least developed and complex person ever, or she is going to have that kind of redemption that makes her just a really, really impressive thing. And again, like, I do still plan after this entire reaction series to make an analysis on Wendy Indigo, because, why not? I already did one for Sera, right? Might as well do one for Wendy as well, and I already did one for Rev. But again, like, it is a really, really impressive situation to really find yourself within as well. I actually forgot to mention during this conversation, I actually had my my entire scale here, my experience scale that I mentioned in, I believe, the last episode. But again, we can definitely save that for, I think far later on, or at least when we're doing like a reconnection with her back in episode 5 of Sera's character, we can definitely mention the experience scale as well. And I will probably bring it back in episode number 6. I'll bring it back in number 6 as well, just to see what we can really garner from her, right? But other than that, this has been Literary Text Productions. Thank you for sticking around once again, my dear seekers, and I will see you on our reactions to episode 4 and episode 5. Have a wonderful